Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estáis? Soy Plácido Doménech y hoy tenemos un nuevo Inside X a este horario 3-4, un domingo. Esta semana hemos hecho el pleno. Gracias por acompañarme, gracias por acompañarnos. Hoy nuevo Inside X, como he dicho, donde vamos a analizar una entrevista de Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt, este personaje que hará He hecho un pequeño análisis con la ayuda de Grok 4 y a ver quién es antes de ver la entrevista. Una entrevista que va a ser medianamente larga, 1 hora y 20 minutos, con declaraciones muy potentes y bueno, vamos a debatirlo. Ya advierto que la semana que viene vamos a hablar mucho de superinteligencia. Vamos a tener un programa sobre ASI soberana, muy derivado. Vamos a tener también seguramente sobre el plan chino, es decir, ha habido una respuesta al plan de actuación, al plan de acción de inteligencia artificial de Estados Unidos de América, pues ha habido una respuesta. Entonces, ¿se acerca un acuerdo? Bueno, no lo vamos a debatir, pero seguramente hagamos un programa también. Y hay un montón de papers, al menos tengo 3 localizados, pero puede ser que haya alguno más, sobre todo uno muy relacionados con la ASI. Y entonces, bueno, la semana que viene yo creo que va a ser, la voy a llamar la semana de la ASI. ¿Qué tiempos aquellos medievales en que yo, mi persona, por hacer un programa titulado Agi Asi, los hombres que caminarán por los dioses, perdí una amistad de alguien que creía mi amigo, me lanzaron piedras, insultos, me intentaron ridiculizar, solo por hacer un programa donde lo único que recogía era declaraciones de gente de primer nivel o opiniones? ¿Qué os parece? Pues esta es la España que tenemos de talento, que la hay, la de talento. Pero existe también la del ego y la de la envidia y la de la maldad también, ¿no? Bueno, pues nada, yo creo que ahora les cuesta un poquito más fruncir el cejo o la frente, ¿no? Da igual. Cuando se publican determinadas cosas, porque claro, se está viendo que todo esto avanza en una dirección que no es la que esperaban los medievos. Ay, de aquellos que decían la era de los LLMs. Gente muy top técnicamente. Pero es que hay una cosa que se llama humildad y mente abierta. Bueno, por lo tanto, si no la tenían ni la tienen, ahora la aparentarán. Pues bueno, vamos al lío. Que también hoy he visto en LinkedIn algunos posts de gente, da igual que sea chico, chica o lo que sea, pero que de perfiles técnicos, aún debatiendo que si pensar, aprender, entender que estos modelos, que no, en mayúscula. Chicos, lo vais a pasar muy mal y nos vamos a divertir mucho, pero ya no voy a perder más tiempo, ya hago más que suficiente. Acordaos que este programa también es de hace unos 9 días, pero es muy potente las declaraciones. No lo he visto, solo he visto algún titular. Y puede ser continuación de este programa, debate, que tenéis que verlo, que es el Winning the Race America's AI Action Plan, que es el plan de América para inteligencia artificial, que como he dicho ha sido contestado por China. Haremos un programa al respecto. Si queréis saber más, pues buscarlo en internet o en Discord, hemos publicado información. Y también es continuación del que vimos ayer, sábado, GPT-7, presidente de Estados Unidos. Esa pequeña reflexión, porque al final hablo de más cosas y solo al final, yo creo que es lo mejor que dijo, o lo más interesante, ¿no? Oye, habrá que reflexionar si GPT-7 o la gobernanza va a estar dirigida por algo no humano, por tecnología, por inteligencia artificial, por superinteligencia, por agentes de gobernanza, por un sistema híbrido humanos AGI, ASI. Bueno, en principio se nombra más una ASI porque el componente AGI está delimitado por la analogía al humano, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, en esto queremos ir más allá del humano, obviamente, y centralizar este tipo de tecnología para la gobernanza de los países, de los continentes, de las culturas, de las civilizaciones y sus proyectos. El de España, bueno, el de Europa y España, pues sabemos cuál es, el regular, y el de España, pues aparte de seguir los cardados de von der Leyen, pues, y otras. Pues nada, tenemos las panderetas de nuestra clase política encabezada por nuestro presidente Antonio. Sí, no me he equivocado, Antonio. Ya lo entenderéis. Bueno, dirige el presidente vuestro amigo Plácido Doménech Espí, y este es un programa de la comunidad de Inteligencia Artificial y Ciencias transversales de habla hispana, 5ª temporada, 5 años, donde no hemos parado. Estoy reflexionando bastante hacia dónde vamos y ya estoy analizando y viendo y se está manifestando la dirección hacia a la que vamos a ir con toda esta nueva era de la inteligencia artificial. Solo acabamos de empezar. Y nuestro éxito es estar. No la cantidad, sino la calidad. Forma parte de un propósito, evidentemente también de una visibilidad, toma de conciencia, divulgación. ¿Por qué no decirlo también marketing? Claro. De momento no vendemos cursos, pero bueno. A ver si os podemos por fin hacer algún tipo de propuesta en el tema de los agentes, ahora lo comentaré. También estoy escribiendo algo sobre Human X. Está el tema de Manifiesto X con Larso. Bueno, varias cosas. Este programa está transmitiéndose por X, YouTube, LinkedIn, Rumble, Kik y Twitch. Sabéis que Meta, ni Facebook, ni Instagram no compartimos mucho los valores con el señor Zuckerberg. Bueno, gracias por el apoyo que estáis dando al canal de YouTube. Un crecimiento rápido, no animal, pero bueno, para un canal como xHUB.AI, tan vertical, tan particular, tan fuera de la narrativa de Avatar, Woke, Disney, de ahí, de aquellos que repiten noticias o resúmenes de Notebook ML, pues ¿qué queréis? Me parece estupendo después de, creo que 1 año o 2 casi bloqueados con Shadowban resistiendo, pues ahora tenemos un cierto crecimiento. Muchas gracias por estar ahí, por el apoyo, los comentarios, etcétera, pero bueno, esto es el principio. Si os gusta lo que estáis viendo, escuchando, pues poner me gusta, compartir, comentad, suscribíos en YouTube, en cualquier plataforma de podcast. Tengo que deciros que los podcasts en iVoox y en cualquier plataforma son gratuitos. Habían como unos 100 programas no gratuitos. Ya están todos gratuitos. No vamos a aplicar ningún tipo de política de retorno económico con el podcast ni con iVoox. Me parece una pequeña tomadura de pelo y no vale la pena. Entonces vamos a ver cómo monetizamos, cómo canalizamos todo este trabajo, que no va a ir a menos, sino va a ir a más y mejor. Si queréis uniros a la comunidad de Discord, como siempre os digo, enviadme un correo o un mensaje directo. Es algo de lo que estamos muy contentos y la verdad es que muchísima actividad, participación. Pronto también vamos a estar en Reddit. Es algo que me... Y estamos trabajando en plataforma propia. La verdad es que esto, pues los tiempos de esto ya es otra cosa, ¿no? Pero bueno, estamos en ello. Y si queréis apoyarnos económicamente mientras monetizamos por otros lados, hasta que eso llega, pues podéis enviarnos apoyo económico o pues un café virtual en Buy Me a Coffee o en PayPal en esta dirección, o enviarnos un superchat en YouTube. Este verano, este Summer AI, que tenemos como reto llegar a los 25.000 suscriptores en YouTube, a los 6.000 en iVoox, a los 700 en Discord. Eres el lado cañado de la IA. Bueno, entiendo que eso es bueno, ¿no? La verdad es que viendo lo que hay, a ver, que hay gente que lo hace muy bien. Pero es que se puede decir que el 99% de contenido es el mismo, no tiene, son repeticiones de... Y las entrevistas, bueno, son mamporreras con el entrevistado, vamos. A mí no es el estilo que me gusta. Hay veces que sí, ¿no? Que me gusta, bueno, que solo hable el entrevistado. Pero el estilo mío, que sé que a mucha gente le ha chocado, incluso no le ha gustado, pero que a todo el mundo no le puede gustar, es bueno, tener una charla, no una entrevista. Si queréis ver la última entrevista de estas tan bonitas que se publican y que tienen tanta audiencia y la equivalencia del mismo entrevistado en xHUB.AI, pues bueno, lo comparáis y veréis qué sorpresa llevas. No voy a decir ni el programa que es ni el entrevistado, pero bueno, quien lleva tiempo siguiendo xHUB.AI sabe a quién me refiero. Entonces, bueno, vamos a ver si llegamos a ese reto. Yo creo que son retos asumibles y es un poco divertido, así que tenéis que ayudarnos. 25.000, 6.000 y 700 en YouTube, en iVoox y en Discord. A ver si lo conseguimos. Y ya estamos haciendo run, que llega, me han dicho ya, la semana que viene, no, la otra, ¿vale? La round 2 de esta charla, de esta entrevista que me hicieron en Inversión Racional, Luis Miguel. Una de las charlas más vistas del canal, y además ved quiénes son los más vistos, top figuras top, y luego la charla más vista de inteligencia artificial, con 269.000 reproducciones. Una auténtica locura, fue una auténtica animalada. Mucha gente me conoció a mí y también al canal de xHUB.AI a través de esta entrevista. Y, pues lo dicho, dentro de 2 semanas vais a tener la round 2, que es diferente, ya os advierto, pero en el mismo estilo. Vamos, si os gustó la primera, os va a gustar la segunda. Lo que pasa puede ser que os guste más la segunda que la primera, y la primera que la segunda, os gusten las dos igual. Da igual, al final yo creo que son charlas del momento y he intentado trasladar una serie de cosas porque cuando me la hicieron lo que pensé es que qué es lo que tenía que decir en este momento tan complicado que no se oye, ¿no? Porque también para hablar siempre de lo mismo, ¿no? De los titulares de la IA o de 4 papers a nivel de título. No, de intentar un poco más profundo, dar tu opinión personal o qué es lo que se debe hacer o no. ¿Qué es importante aquí? Lo he leído en LinkedIn y es cierto. Y estoy pensando en ello, ¿no? Que es xHUB.AI nace no solo para divulgar, sino para hacer. Y estamos pensando en ello, en hacer. En cómo crear y participar de ese nuevo futuro que visionamos, que defendemos, qué podemos hacer, ¿no? ¿Y qué hacemos? Pero bueno, no, hacer ya hacemos cosas, yo particularmente hago cosas, ¿no? En mi vida, en mi trabajo, bueno. Pero, ¿qué podemos hacer más? En este sentido, ¿no? A nivel de comunidad, a nivel de xHUB, a nivel empresarial, a nivel individual, a nivel de equipos, de gente que tienen la misma intención. Y hay cosas y iremos viendo. Una de ellas es Manifiesto X, que yo creo que es importante. Vamos a meter caña a Manifiesto X, también a Human X van a ser complementarios. Y bueno, ya me lo habéis preguntado bastante, esto tuvo mucha acogida. En cuanto esté, lo voy a publicar en redes sociales, también os avisaré por aquí, me enviáis un mensaje directo y os enviaré un enlace de descarga, va a ser gratuito. Es una recopilación, es el kit X Agentic AI 2025 de agosto, que es un kit de Agentic AI, de agentes con información técnica, de consultorías, de Big Techs, que normalmente han sido publicadas, pero que aquí está todo recopilado. Hay muchísima información y bueno, pensé que sería interesante generar un kit y poder tener un enlace y descargarlo y tenerlo todo, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que hice yo? Pues bueno, y es gratuito, ¿de acuerdo? Vamos a hacer algo de formación, está claro, con el tema de agentes, pero estoy pensándolo. Ya os digo que no se os vende nada más que, bueno, que sí que la gente que lo pida que sepa quién es, ¿no? Quién me lo ha pedido, nada más. Vamos a hablar muy brevemente, rápidamente, de quién es Eric Schmidt, porque es importante. Vamos a leer un poquito quién es. Y vemos el vídeo. Vamos a por ello. Eric Schmidt. Eric Emerson Schmidt, nacido el 27 de abril de 1955, en Falls Church, Virginia, Estados Unidos. Es un ingeniero, empresario y filántropo estadounidense conocido principalmente por su rol en Google y Alphabet, un periodo ahí perdido. Hijo de un profesor de economía y una psicóloga, pasó parte de su infancia en Italia lo que influyó en su perspectiva global. Se graduó en Ingeniería Eléctrica en la Universidad de Princeton en 1976 y obtuvo una maestría en la Universidad de California, Berkeley, en 1979 y un doctorado de Ciencias de la Computación en 1982, enfocándose en redes y desarrollo de software distribuido. La carrera profesional de Schmidt comenzó en empresas como Bell Labs, Xerox PARC y Sun Microsystems, donde ascendió a vicepresidente y fue blanco de bromas legendarias del Día de los Inocentes. No sabemos por qué, quería haber profundizado, pero bueno, no creo que sea importante. En 1997 se convirtió en CEO de Nobel, luego, pero dejó el cargo en 2001 tras una adquisición. Ese mismo año se unió a Google como presidente de la Junta, es decir, en 2001 en Google, y en agosto de 2001 como CEO, cargo que ocupó hasta 2011, es decir, estuvo 10 años de CEO de Google, supervisando el crecimiento explosivo de la compañía junto a Larry Page y Sergey Brin. Posteriormente fue presidente ejecutivo de Google 2011-2015 y de Alphabet 2015-2017. Es decir, la trayectoria en Google ha sido impresionante y larga, y asesor técnico hasta 2020. En marzo de 2025 adquirió una participación controladora en Relativity Space, una empresa de manufactura espacial, y se convirtió en su CEO. A lo Elon Musk. Ha servido en juntas directivas de instituciones como Apple, Princeton, Mayo Clinic y el Broad Institute. Fundó Innovation Endeavors en 2010, invirtiendo en startups como Uber. En 2022 presidió Sandbox.AQ, una firma de inteligencia artificial y computación cuántica valorada en 5,3 mil millones de dólares en 2024. Es decir, en espacio, en tecnología aeroespacial, en computación cuántica, en inteligencia artificial. Otras inversiones incluyen Rebellion Defense, ha tenido mucha inversión en empresas de ámbito militar, Istari, White Stork, y en 2023 quita pagos transfronterizos. En 2023 participó en la compra del equipo de la NFL Washington Commanders por 6,05 mil millones de dólares. En 2006, junto a su esposa Wendy Boyle, fundó la Smith Family Foundation, enfocada en sostenibilidad y recursos naturales, con programas como el 11th Hour Project. Han donado millones a causas como el Acuario de Monterrey Bay, 10 millones en 2015, y el Centro Smith de Datos en UC Berkeley, 12,6 millones en 2022. Tienen una hija, Sophie, y su otra hija, Allison, falleció en 2017, no sabemos por qué. Smith obtuvo ciudadanía chipriota en 2020 y fue nombrado caballero comandante honorario del Imperio Británico en 2024 por su filantropía. Su fortuna neta se estima en 37,8 mil millones de dólares de 2024. La implicación política de Smith: apoyó la campaña de Barack Obama en 2008, importante dato, y sirvió en su Consejo de Transición y en el Consejo de Asesores en Ciencia y Tecnología. Presidió la Junta de Innovación del Departamento de Defensa 2016-2020 y la Comisión Nacional de Seguridad e Inteligencia Artificial 2019-2021. Fundó el Special Competitive Studies Project en 2021 y testificó ante el Congreso sobre IA en 2023. Influenció la política de inteligencia artificial en la administración Biden, pues luego comentaremos esto. Y fue nombrado en la Comisión de Seguridad Nacional sobre Biotecnología Emergente en 2022. En la Comisión de Seguridad Nacional sobre Biotecnología Emergente en 2022, es decir, espacio, economía, tecnología, inteligencia artificial, pagos, criptomonedas, militar, biotecnología. Figura importante, por eso os estoy leyendo la biografía. No lo he hecho con ninguno anteriormente, pero creo que es importante contextualizar el personaje. Ha enfrentado críticas por acuerdos anticompetitivos en Google, resueltos en 2014 con una multa de 415 millones de dólares en la High Tech Employee Antitrust Litigation. Defendió las estrategias de evasión fiscal de Google en 2012-2013, llamándolas capitalismo. En 2023-2024 fue señalado por altas emisiones de CO2 de su jet privado. Bueno, qué cosa, aquí tenemos el Falcon de Antonio. Y en 2024 sugirió en una entrevista que startups de inteligencia artificial podrían ignorar propiedad intelectual inicialmente, a lo Donald Trump, ¿no? Eso no es muy Biden, ¿no? Y aquí tenemos unas fotos que sé que os van a gustar mucho. A ver quién lo adivina. Venga, aquí tenemos una foto. No conozco a todos, ¿no? Pero está... Creo que el de la izquierda es Joshua Bengio, Jan LeCun, Demis Hassabis, Jürgen Smith-Huber, de blanquito. Jürgen Smith-Huber es un crack. Future of Life Institute. ¿A alguien le suena a esto? Pues son fotos de el bootcamp que hicieron para definir los 23 principios de Asilomar. Sí, chicos, Asilomar. Están aquí todos. Están todos. ¿Quién falta? Bueno, pues el que tenéis aquí hablando de ciberseguridad. Sami Alman con su bomber en Asilomar. ¿Quién lo ha visto y quién lo ve? Espectacular lo de Sami. Y aquí a quién tenemos. Sí, a nuestro protagonista. A Eric Schmidt. ¿Qué significa? Que este señor es una figura principal en el desarrollo narrativa tecnológica de las Big Techs de Google, Estados Unidos, América. Dicho lo cual, aquí tenemos otro ser de luz, no el de la derecha, que es un crack, y además se conserva, el tío es un crack. Jürgen Smith-Huber a la derecha, y a la izquierda tenemos a el responsable de Future of Life Institute, autor de Vida 3.0, Max Tegmark. Asilomar, 2017. Cociendo la historia, la narrativa y el futuro de la inteligencia artificial. Pensad. Y ahora sí, vamos a ver la charla juntos. Vamos a por ello.
When do you see what you define as digital superintelligence?
Within 10 years.
The AI's ability to generate its own scaffolding is imminent. Pretty much sure that will be a 2025 thing.
We certainly don't know what superintelligence will deliver, but we know it's coming.
And what do people need to know about that?
You're going to have your own polymath. So you're going to have the sum of Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci in the equivalent of your pocket. Agents are going to happen. This math thing is going to happen. The software thing is going to happen. Everything I've talked about is in the positive domain, but there's a negative domain as well. It's likely, in my opinion, that you're going to see
Now that's a moonshot, ladies and gentlemen.
Everybody, welcome to Moonshots. I'm here live with my moonshot mate, Dave Blunden. We're here in our Santa Monica studios, and we have a special guest today, Eric Schmidt, the author of Genesis. We talk about China. We're going to talk about, digital superintelligence. We'll talk about, what people should be thinking about over the 10 years.
And we're talking about the guy who has more access to more actionable information than probably anyone else you could think of. So it should be pretty exciting.
Incredibly brilliant. All right. Stand by for a conversation with the Eric Schmidt, CEO or past CEO of Google, and an extraordinary investor and thinker in this field of AI.
Let's do it.
Eric, welcome back to Moonshots.
it's great to be here with you guys.
Thank you. It's been a long road since I first met you at Google. I remember our first conversations were fantastic. It's been a crazy month in the world of AI, but I think every month from here is going to be a crazy month. And so I'd love to hit on a number of subjects and get your take on them.
Of course.
I want to start with probably the most important point that you've made recently that got a lot of traction, a lot of attention, which is that AI is underhyped when the rest of the world is either confused, lost, or think it's, not impacting us. We'll get into it in more detail, but quick, most important point to make there.
AI is a learning machine.
Yeah.
And in network effect businesses, when the learning machine learns faster, everything accelerates. It accelerates to its natural limit. The natural limit is electricity.
Not chips.
Electricity.
Really? Okay.
So that gets me to the next point here, which is a discussion on AI and energy. So what we saw recently was Meta recently announcing that they signed a 20-year nuclear contract with Constellation Energy. We've seen Google, Microsoft, Amazon, everybody buying basically nuclear capacity right now. That's got to be weird. That private companies are basically taking over into their own hands what was utility function before.
Well, just to be cynical, I'm so glad those companies plan to be around the 20 years that it's going to take to get the nuclear power plants built. In my recent testimony, I talked about the current expected need for the AI revolution in the United States is 92 gigawatts of more power. Mm-hmm. For reference, 1 gigawatt is one big nuclear power station, and there are none essentially being started now.
And there have been 2 in the last, 30 years built.
There is excitement that there's an SMR, small modular reactor, coming in at 300 megawatts, but it won't start till 2030. As important as nuclear, both fission and fusion is, they're not going to arrive in time to get us what we need as a globe to deal with our many problems and the many opportunities that are before us.
Yeah.
Do you think, so if you look at the sort of 3-year timeline toward AGI, do you think if you started a fusion reactor project today that won't come online for 5, 6, 7 years, is there a probability that the AGI comes up with some other breakthrough, fusion or otherwise, that makes it irrelevant before it even gets online?
A very good question. We don't know what artificial general intelligence will deliver.
Yeah.
And we certainly don't know what superintelligence will deliver. But we know it's coming. So first we need to plan for it. And there's lots of issues as well as opportunities for that.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter is that the computing needs that we need now are going to come from traditional energy suppliers in places like the United States and the Arab world and Canada and the Western world. And it's important to note that China has lots of electricity. So if they get the chips, it's going to be one heck of a race.
Yeah, they've been scaling it.
Varias cosas aquí, ¿no? Un inicio intenso. La electricidad es el límite. Bueno, la electricidad, los chips, la cadena de suministro, ¿no? La capacidad de cómputo. En definitiva, ¿qué es lo que necesita la inteligencia artificial para evolucionar, para ofrecerse como recurso al mundo, ¿no? Hablan de energía nuclear, hablan de que no llegan a tiempo, y lo dicen ellos, América, Estados Unidos. ¿Qué pensáis? ¿Que llegamos nosotros a tiempo? ¿Qué se está haciendo en España y en Europa? Construir las AI factories, que no va a ser más que distribución de dinero, porque ¿qué resultado va a tener construir 3 data centers o 4? No se entiende la carrera en España, en Europa, ni se quiere entender porque afrontaríamos una pesadilla, una historia de terror, pero realista, ¿no? Entonces es mejor vender sueños que no se van a cumplir. Y aquí tenemos pues una reflexión de Eric Schmidt, y vuelve a advertir de lo siguiente, es que China, en definitiva, es el gran enemigo y China tiene mucha energía. Entonces, en definitiva, es una carrera civilizatoria donde la energía va a ser algo crítico y donde el espejo de Estados Unidos, a la hora de competir, no es evidentemente Europa, que se considera aliado, ni los países árabes, Canadá, Occidente o países occidentales. En definitiva, el miedo de Estados Unidos es que China tenga una supremacía tecnológica y civilizatoria.
At 2 or 3 times the U.S. The U.S. has been flat for how long in terms of energy production?
From my perspective, infinite. In fact, electricity demand declined for a while, as has overall energy needs because of conservation and other things. Mm-hmm. But the data center story is the story of the energy people, right? And you sit there and you go, how could these data centers use so much power? Well, and especially when you think about how little power our brains do, mm-hmm. Well, these are our best approximation in digital form of how our brains work. But when they start working together, they become superbrains. The promise of a superbrain with a 1 gigawatt, for example, data center is so palpable, people are going crazy. And by the way, the economics of these things are unproven. how much revenue do you have to have 50 billion in capital? Well, if you depreciate it over 3 years or 4 years, you need to have 10 or 15 billion dollars of capital spend per year just to handle the infrastructure. Those are huge businesses and huge revenue, which in most places is not there yet.
I'm curious, there's so much capital being invested and deployed right now in SMRs, in nuclear, bringing 3 Mile Island back online, in fusion companies. Why isn't there an equal amount of capital going into making the entire chipset and compute just 1,000 times more energy efficient?
There is a similar amount going in capital. There are many, many startups that are working on non-traditional ways of doing chips. The transformer architecture, which is what is powering things today, has new variants. Every week or so, I get a pitch from a new startup that's going to build inference time, test time computing, which are simpler, and they're optimized for inference. It looks like the hardware will arrive just as the software needs expand. And by the way, that's always been true. We old timers had a phrase, Grove giveth and Gates take it away. So Intel would improve the chipsets, right? Way back when. Yeah. And the software people would immediately use it all. Suck it all up.
Higher level code.
I have no reason to believe that law, Grove and Gates law, has changed. Yeah. If you look at the gains in like the Blackwell chip or the the 350 chip in AMD, these chips are massive supercomputers. And yet we need, according to the people, have hundreds of thousands of these chips just to make a data center work. That shows you the scale of what this kind of thinking algorithms. Now you sit there and you go, what could these people possibly be doing with all of these chips? I'll give you an example. We went from language to language, which is what ChatGPT can be understood at, to reasoning and thinking. If you want to look at an OpenAI example, look at OpenAI 03, which does forward and back reinforcement learning and planning. Now, the cost of doing the forward and back is many orders of magnitude besides just answering your question for your PhD thesis or your college paper. That planning, the back and forth, is computationally very, very expensive. So with the best energy and the best technology today, we are able to show evidence of planning. Many people believe that if you combine planning and very deep memories, you can build human-level intelligence. Now, of course, it will be very expensive to start with, but humans are very, very industrious. And furthermore, the great future companies will have AI scientists, that is non-human scientists, AI programmers, that is opposed to human programmers, who will accelerate their impact. So if you think about it, going back to, you're the author of the abundance thesis, as best I can tell, Peter. You've talked about this for 20 years. You saw it first. It sure looks like if we get enough electricity, we can generate the power in the sense of intellectual power to generate abundance along the lines that you predicted 2 decades ago.
Every week, I study the 10 major tech meta trends.
Bueno, voy a poner aquí, ahora lo avanzaré. Vamos a dejar avanzar. A ver qué hay por aquí. M.A. Martín. Buenas tardes, M.A. Martín. El café, dice, el café con cosas se llama carajillo. yo, bueno, sé más de café, pero bueno. Black Box IA, miedo a China, miedo por la superinteligencia china. Con el miedo pueden poner sus leyes con la excusa de que si no lo vas a hacer China, pues lo hará. Pero es nuclear el asunto y no por los mini reactores. Buenas tardes, estoy de acuerdo contigo, pero no es un cuento de Jamelín, sino es algo real. Ahí están los SMR. Dice, buenas tardes. Aquí sí llegamos a tiempo, Alberto Zenit. No esperaban a continuar. Un segundo, vamos a parar. Alberto de Zenit dice, voy a poner aquí. Aquí sí que llegamos a tiempo de cerrar las nucleares que quedan. Pero es algo serio que es preocupante. Es preocupante cómo se está abordando todo esto de forma nula por parte de Europa y España. Y la gente le da igual. Le da igual.
companies in the lab that are doing voice customer service, voice sales with the new, just as of the last month.
Sure.
And the value of these conversations is $10 to $1,000. And the cost of the compute is, maybe 2-3 concurrent GPUs is optimal. It's like 10, 20 cents. And so they would buy massively more compute to improve the quality of the conversation. There aren't even close to enough. We count about 10 million concurrent phone calls that should move to AI in the next year or so.
And my view of that is that's a good tactical solution and a great business. Let's look at other examples of tactical solutions that are great businesses. And I obviously have a conflict of interest talking about Google because I love it so much. So with that as in mind, look at the Google strength in GCP now, Google's cloud product, where they have a completely fully served enterprise offering for essentially automating your company with AI.
Yeah.
And the remarkable thing, and this is to me is shocking, is you can, in an enterprise, write the tasks that you want, and then using something called the Model Context Protocol, you can connect your databases to that, and the large language model can produce the code for your enterprise. Now, there's 100,000 enterprise software companies, middleware companies that grew up in the last 30 years that I've been working on this that are all now in trouble because that interstitial connection is no longer needed.
With their business.
And of course, they'll have to change as well. The good news for them is enterprises make these changes very slowly. If you built a brand new enterprise architecture for ERP and MRP, you would be highly tempted to not use any of the ERP or MRP suppliers, but instead use open source libraries, build essentially use BigQuery or the equivalent from Amazon, which is Redshift, and essentially build that architecture, and it gives you infinite flexibility, and the computer system writes most of the code. Now, programmers don't go away at the moment. It's pretty clear that junior programmers go away. The sort of journeyman, if you will, of the stereotype, because these systems aren't good enough yet to automatically write all the code. They need very senior computer scientists, computer engineers who are watching it. That will eventually go away.
Yeah.
One of the things to say about productivity, and I call this the San Francisco consensus because it's largely the view of people who operate in San Francisco, goes something like this. We're just about to the point where we can do two things that are shocking. The first is we can replace most programming tasks by computers, and we can replace most mathematical tasks by computers. Now you sit there and you go, why? Well, if you think about programming and math, they have limited language sets compared to human language.
Yeah.
So they're simpler computationally, and they're scale free. You can just do it and do it and do it with more electricity. You don't need data. You don't need real world input. You don't need telemetry. You don't need sensors.
Yeah.
So it's likely, in my opinion, that you're going to see world-class mathematicians emerge in the next 1 year that are AI-based, and world-class programmers that are going to appear within the next 1 or 2 years. When those things are deployed at scale, remember, math and programming are the basis of kind of everything,
yes.
right?
Yep.
It's an accelerant for physics, chemistry, biology, material science. So going back to things like climate change, can you imagine if we, and this goes back to your original argument, Peter, imagine if we can accelerate the discoveries of the new materials that allow us to deal with a carbonized world. It's very exciting.
I'd love to drill in. Well,
Okay,
wait, no, you first.
I just want to hit this because it's important. The potential for there to be, I don't want to use the word PhD level, other than thinking in the terms of researchers, the PhD level AIs and that can basically attack any problem and solve it, and solve math, if you would, and physics. This idea of an AI, intelligence explosion. Leopold put that at like 26, 27, heading towards digital superintelligence in the next few years. Do you buy that time frame?
So again, I consider that to be the San Francisco consensus. I think the dates are probably off by 1.5.
Bueno, antes de que vayan al tema de las fechas y de Leopold, que es el ex empleado de OpenAI. Vamos a hacer un pequeño análisis de lo que han dicho hasta ahora en este segundo bloque. Data centers, super cerebros, llamado por Eric Schmidt, y inversiones multimillonarias para retornos multimillonarios. Va a ser complicado las pequeñas economías, evidentemente. Hablan del tema de la energía, hablan de por qué, en vez de invertir en energía nuclear, en fusión, por qué no lo hacen en la eficiencia de chips, en la eficiencia de algoritmos. Esto también está ocurriendo. Yo creo que no sé qué tipo de inversión o cuánto habrá en un sentido u en otro, pero evidentemente estamos viendo cada vez más, como dice muy bien Eric Schmidt, alternativas o optimizaciones a la arquitectura Transformers que supongan una eficiencia energética, pero nunca será suficiente. Es decir, no se va a bajar una porque otra crezca, sino que en definitiva lo que se hará es acelerar aún más. Con lo que entonces no vamos a conseguir una ganancia en reducir la energía nuclear, sino que simplemente iremos más lentos o más rápidos. ¿Hacia qué? Hacia el desarrollo de la singularidad en inteligencia, en superinteligencia. El desarrollo de superinteligencia más allá del humano, es decir, en un concepto que suponga una disrupción y un hito en esta nueva era. Hablan de que entendamos la escala de las cosas, ¿no? No estamos hablando de tener una tarjeta, 2, 10, ojalá, sino miles o decenas de miles, cientos de miles, y se habla de millones de tarjetas. Eso es, imaginar la capacidad. Pone un ejemplo que me ha gustado mucho, que es el tema de los call centers, ¿no? Dice, bueno, da igual lo caro que sea, si lo que hay que hacer es llevar a inferencia de IAs las llamadas, por ejemplo, que es algo ya bastante efectivo y realista y bueno, pues ya se sabe que casi prácticamente todo el first line, la primera línea de atención telefónica o de atención al servicio al cliente va a llevarse a ella. Imaginar la cantidad de computación o de negocio que hay ahí para transformar. No se lo van a acabar. Entonces, claro, hay una demanda brutal, una inversión brutal. Todo el mundo está en esto porque va a transformar el mundo. Menos, volvemos a decirlo, pues nosotros y Europa. Hablan también de los programadores, ¿no? Y programadores y matemáticos. Y es importante, me está gustando mucho Eric Schmidt, como está comentándolo todo, muy directo, concreto, para que se entienda. En definitiva, estas capacidades que son la base de cualquier ciencia. Y más allá de eso, pero entendemos que la IA no se va a quedar ahí, como dijo Demis Hassabis con AlphaEvolve, que ahora mismo se aplica a matemáticas y programación porque les permitía validar resultados, pero esto va a ir más a un contexto más general y va a afectar, evidentemente, de una forma totalmente disruptiva, ¿no? Entonces es muy interesante. Vamos a ver el chat y continuamos. Interesante la charla. Buenas tardes a todos, abogado, habitual. Vamos a seguir.
Or 2 times, which is pretty close. So a reasonable prediction is that we're going to have specialized savants in every field within 5 years. That's pretty much in the bag as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
And here's why. You have this amount of humans, and then you add 1 million AI scientists to do something, your slope goes like this, your rate of improvement. We should get there. The real question is, once you have all these savants, do they unify?
Mm-hmm.
Do they ultimately become a superhuman? The term we're using is superintelligence, which implies intelligence that beyond the sum of what humans can do. Mm-hmm. The race to superintelligence, which is incredibly important, because imagine what a superintelligence could do that we ourselves cannot imagine, right? It's so much smarter than we. And it has huge proliferation issues, competitive issues, China versus the US issues, electricity issues, so forth. We don't even have the language for the deterrence aspects and the proliferation issues of these powerful models.
Or the imagination.
Totally agree. In fact, it's one of the great flaws, actually, in the original conception. You remember Singularity University and Ray Kurzweil's books and everything, and we kind of drew this curve of rat-level intelligence, then cat, then monkey, and then it hits human, and then it goes super intelligent. But it's now really obvious when you talk to one of these multilingual models that's explaining physics to you, that it's already hugely super intelligent within its savant category. Yeah. And so Demis Hassabis keeps redefining AGI day as, well, when it can discover relativity the same way Einstein did with data that was available up until that date, that's when we have AGI.
So
long before that.
Yeah, so I think it's worth getting the timeline right.
Yeah.
So the following things are baked in. you're going to have an agentic revolution where agents are connected to solve business processes, government processes, and so forth. They will be adopted most quickly in companies that have a lot of money and a lot of time latency issues at stake. It will be adopted most slowly in places like government, which do not have an incentive for innovation, and fundamentally are job programs and redistribution of income kind of programs. So call it what you will. The important thing is that there will be a tip of the spear in places like financial services, certain kind of biomedical things, startups, and so forth. And that's the place to watch. So all of that is going to happen. The agents are going to happen. This math thing is going to happen. The software thing is going to happen. We can debate the rate at which the biological revolution will occur, but everyone agrees that it's right after, that we're very close to these major biological understandings. In physics, you're limited by data, but you can generate it synthetically. There are groups which I'm funding, which are generating physics, essentially models that can approximate algorithms that cannot be, they're incomputable. So in other words, you have essentially a foundation model that can answer the question good enough for the purposes of doing physics without having to spend a million years doing the computation of quantum chromodynamics and things like that. All of that's going to happen. The next questions have to do with what is the point in which this becomes a national emergency? And it goes something like this. Everything I've talked about is in the positive domain, but there's a negative domain as well. The ability for biological attacks, obviously cyber attacks. Imagine a cyber attack that we as humans cannot conceive of, which means there's no defense for it because no one ever thought about it, right? These are real issues. A biological attack, you take a virus, I won't obviously go into the details, you take a virus that's bad and you make it undetectable by some changes in its structure, which again, I won't go into the details. We released a whole report at the national level on this issue. So at some point, the government, and it doesn't appear to understand this now, is going to have to say, this is very big because it affects national security, national economic strengths, and so forth. Now, China clearly understands this, and China is putting an enormous amount of money into this. We have slowed them down by virtue of our CHIPS controls, but they've found clever ways around this. There are also proliferation issues. Many of the chips that they're not supposed to have, they seem to be able to get. And more importantly, as I mentioned, the algorithms are changing. And instead of having these expensive foundation models by themselves, you have continuous updating, which is called test time training. That continuous updating appears to be capable of being done with lesser powered chips. So there are so many questions that I think we don't know. We don't know the role of open source, because remember, open source means open weights, which means everyone can use it. A fair reading of this is that every country that's not in the West will end up using open source because they'll perceive it as cheaper, which transfers leadership in open source from America to China. That's a big deal, right, if that occurs. How much longer do the chip bans, if you will, hold, and how long before China can answer? What are the effects of the current government's policies of getting rid of foreigners and foreign investment? What happens with the Arab data centers, assuming they work? And I'm generally supportive of them. If those things are then misused to help train Chinese models, the list just goes on and on. We just don't know.
Okay, can I ask you probably...
Bueno, aquí se han dicho un montón de cosas. Brutal la charla, ¿eh? Brutal la charla. Vamos a ver. Se habla de que evidentemente las capacidades de inteligencia artificial van a llegar a aumentar las capacidades humanas, obviamente, tanto cognitivas como biológicas, evidentemente, eso no se descarta. La llegada de lo superhumano, lo superinteligente, o las superinteligencias provocarán seguramente posteriormente la evolución dirigida a nivel biológico. Es la siguiente fase, la integración de IA en el ser humano y la evolución del propio ser humano como especie, ¿no? Creando una nueva especie, otras la misma, eso, pero va a ser inevitable, le guste a quien le guste, a quien no le guste, pues será opcional, pero es inevitable porque yo creo que ya está sucediendo. Bueno, sí, quitaría lo de creo, pero bueno. Hay una cosa que dicen, que repiten, que está muy bien y yo también la suscribo, que es lo que dice mis Hassabis. Oye, ¿cuándo tendremos una AGI? Cuando sea capaz, teniendo todos los datos de la física a una fecha dada, desarrollar como si fuera Einstein la teoría de la relatividad. Sería un buen test. Ahí yo creo que poca gente discutiría que tendríamos una AGI, ¿no? Aunque muchos considerarían así, entraríamos en una difusión de conceptos, ¿no? Habla Eric Schmidt de cuándo se considerará todo esto ya una emergencia nacional, algo que atenta a la seguridad nacional. Bueno, esta entrevista es anterior al Action Plan de América en inteligencia artificial que vimos el jueves en debate, que es importantísimo, que como veréis los medievos, y los abogados y los cuadriculados no comentan absolutamente nada, no les interesa, porque es una narrativa y un golpe de realidad que no saben encajar. Claro, eso ni salen noticias porque, claro, iría contra el cuento de Hammering que intentan vendernos, que nos lleva al auténtico precipicio. Dice evidentemente que todo este desarrollo y explosión de inteligencia pues nos lleva a muchas cosas positivas, como se han comentado, pero también cosas negativas como bioataques. Habla del tema de los virus, que han presentado un informe al respecto, el tema de ciberataques y bueno, muchísimas cosas más, ¿no? Temas militares, eso no lo dice porque él hace negocio con ello, claro. Curioso, ¿no? Que no comenten el tema negativo de lo que él hace negocio y es lo más cruel, que es acabar con la vida humana, aunque evidentemente con los bioataques o los virus también nos suena, ¿no? Ya con el tema de la pandemia, yo creo que ya hubo algo ahí y con el tema de los ciberataques, pues también, fíjate, lo del apagón que se decía que era un ciberataque. Bueno. China, vuelven otra vez con el tema de China. China, ¿qué ocurre con China? China es el gran enemigo, China ha puesto mucho dinero, oye, que China está ofreciendo esto como código abierto, pero código abierto o open weights. Fijaos que en el AI Action Plan de América defienden el open source y las open weights. ¿Qué significa? Que yo creo que Smith es del lado globalista, Obama, no de... Pero bueno, que yo entiendo que también Estados Unidos está jugando el ser, continuar siendo lo que era o vivir la desaparición de un imperio, la transformación de un imperio en algo peor. Se lo juegan todo, ¿eh? Cuidado con esto, ¿eh? Con China, los BRICS, cuidado. Dice Estados Unidos que evidentemente si todo esto de open source y open weights se traslada a China, pues la gente, incluso el mundo occidental, va a virar de Estados Unidos a China y eso va a ser una auténtica putada y que a pesar de que ellos han intentado enlentecer el desarrollo de China de la inteligencia artificial, pues no lo han conseguido porque lo que han conseguido es generar pues, por varias vías conseguir estos chips o optimizar algoritmos que hace que consuma mucho menos energía, con lo que entonces desarrollan los mismos sistemas y encima se han calentado la cabeza para hacerlos mejor, por lo que entonces con el hardware actual pues aún son mejores que lo que desarrollan ellos, ¿no? Es decir, que los han puteado y han salido más fuertes. Y la jugada de yo soy aquí tu amo y tienes que estar sometido, pues no le ha salido muy bien a Estados Unidos. Aparte de que esa narrativa a la humanidad, a ver si se entera ya Estados Unidos, no le gusta. Van a tener que vender otra historia para que creamos que son los buenos. Vamos a ver en el chat qué decís. Aquí, XXX. A ver. Cuando usen las matemáticas vorticiales, no sé lo que son, ya lo habrán conseguido. Ellos no necesitan más. Ahora andan con el 0, 1, 2, necesitan usar el 1 al 9, no sé lo que es. El cerebro tiene la capacidad del cuerpo, el universo en convertir el ruido en señales, así generar energía infinita o inmensa, no se necesita tanta energía, sí, pero bueno, ahora no sabemos aún cómo hacerlo. Si lo supieran, lo estarían haciendo. Espérate, ya me lo he puesto aquí. Espérate. Siempre entra algún bot. Vale, vamos a seguir viendo la charla que está súper interesante.
One of the toughest questions. I don't know if you saw Mark Andreessen He went and talked to the Biden administration, past administration, and said, how are we going to deal with exactly what you just talked about, chemical and biological and radiological and nuclear risks from big foundation models being operated by foreign countries? And the Biden answer was, we're going to keep it into the 3 or 4 big companies like Google, and we'll just regulate them. And Mark was like, that is a surefire way to lose the race with China, because all innovation comes from a startup that you didn't anticipate, or, it's just the American history, and you're cutting off the entrepreneur from participating in this. So as of right now, with the open source models, the entrepreneurs are in great shape. But if you think about the models getting crazy smart a year from now, how are we going to have the balance between startups actually being able to work with the best technology, but proliferation not percolating to every country in the world?
Again, a set of unknown questions. And anybody who knows the answer to these things is not telling the full truth. The doctrine in the Biden administration was called 10 to the 26 flops. It was a point that was a consensus above which the models were powerful enough to cause some damage. So the theory was that if you stayed below 10 to the 26, you didn't need to be regulated. But if you were above that, you needed to be regulated. And the proposal in the Biden administration was to regulate both the open source and the closed source. Okay? Those are the summary.
Yep.
That, of course, has been ended by the Trump administration. They have not yet produced their own thinking in this area. They're very concerned about China and it getting forward, so they'll come out with something. From my perspective, the core questions are the following. Will the Chinese be able to use, even with chip restrictions, will they use architectural changes that will allow them to build models as powerful as ours? And let's assume they're government funded. That's the first question. The next question is, how will you raise $50 billion for your data center if your product is open source?
Yeah.
In the American model, part of the reason these models are closed is that the business people and the lawyers correctly are saying, I've got to sell this thing because I've got to pay for my capital. These are not free goods. And the US government correctly is not giving $50 billion to these companies. So we don't know that. To me, the key question to watch is look at DeepSeek. So DeepSeek, a week or so ago, Gemini 2.5 Pro got to the top of the leaderboards in intelligence. Great achievement for my friends at Gemini. A week later, DeepSeek comes in and is slightly better than Gemini. And DeepSeek is trained on the existing hardware that's in China, which includes stuff that's been pilfered and some of the Ascend, it's called the Ascend Huawei chips and a few others. What happens? Now, the US people say, well, the DeepSeek people cheated. And they cheated by doing a technique called distillation, where you take a large model and you ask it 10,000 questions, you get its answers, then you use that as your training material. So the US companies will have to figure out a way to make sure that their proprietary information that they've spent so much money on does not get leaked into these open source things. I just don't know. With respect to nuclear, biological, chemical, and so forth issues, the US companies are doing a really good job of looking for that. There's a great concern, for example, that nuclear information would leak into these models as they're training without us knowing it. And by the way, that's a violation of law.
Oh, really?
They work, and the whole nuclear information thing is there's no free speech in that world for good reasons. And there's no free use and copyright and all that kind of stuff. It's illegal to do it. And so they're doing a really, really good job of making sure that that does not happen. They also put in very significant tests for biological information and certain kinds of cyber attacks. What happens there? Their incentive to continue, especially if it's not required by law. The government has just gotten rid of the safety institutes that were in place in Biden and are replacing it by a new term, which is largely a safety assessment program, which is a fine answer. I think collectively we in the industry just want the government at the secret and top secret level to have people who are really studying what China and others are doing. You can be sure that China really has very smart people studying what we're doing. We at the secret and top secret level should have the same thing.
Have you read the...
Bueno. Qué locura. Dice que Biden ya alertó que, bueno, yo estaba convencido de que si Biden seguía prohibirían el open source y cerrarían el desarrollo de la IA, como bien quería Sam Altman, ¿eh? Sam Altman quería esto. No, mira, nosotros somos una cosa y luego los pequeñitos que pueden ir desarrollando cositas. Ese es el mundo que quería Sam Altman. Ahora no, ahora OpenAI va a desarrollar Open, lo de Open se lo pueden meter por ahí abajo. Ahora van a desarrollar OpenAI un modelo de código abierto. ¿Para qué? Para que no sean vistos como anti-open source y puedan ser vistos como una compañía china de las muchas que hay, como Alibaba, Kimi, bueno, Kimi es el modelo, DeepSeek, etcétera, ¿no? A Estados Unidos se le está cayendo la narrativa. Dicen las startups, bueno, ahí entró Mark Zuckerberg y dijo, oye, si cortáis el grifo a las empresas pequeñas, vamos a cortar la innovación y además la esencia de lo que ha sido América, ¿no? La oportunidad desde abajo llegar arriba. Pero claro, todos estos millonarios, lobbies y políticos que saben de todo lo que es el desarrollo del talento y la pasión por la evolución y por el desarrollo civilizatorio. Nada. Nada. Biden proponía una ley que en Europa está, yo creo que está aún, que es el de los flops. Tú no puedes desarrollar un modelo por encima de 10 elevado a 26 flops. A partir de ahí, el gobierno está encima tuyo, da igual que sea código abierto, un desarrollo propietario, lo que sea, 10 elevado a 26. En Europa lo copiaron y en vez de 10 elevado a 26 era 10 elevado a 25, por no molestar a los americanos, entiendo. No lo sé, hay cosas que desconozco. ¿Por qué 10 elevado a 25 y no 10 elevado a 27 para poder competir mejor? Pero claro, ¿qué hace China al respecto en este sentido? ¿Tiene algún límite? No. Bueno, sí, el límite del hardware que les vendieron, ¿no? Pero que ahora con Huawei y con otros desarrollos de hardware propietarios, pues Estados Unidos le van a decir que no me importa lo que hagas. ¿Qué tiene que hacer Europa? ¿Apostar por China? ¿Apostar por Estados Unidos? Pues o cambia Estados Unidos radicalmente, cosa que lo veo complicado pero posible, o la apuesta y el partido ya lo ha ganado, la guerra ya la ha ganado China. Y la guerra sería de proyecto civilizatorio, donde implicaría muchas cosas a nivel económico, a nivel tecnológico, a nivel de muchas cosas. Tener en cuenta este acuerdo, ¿no?, de España con Huawei, el tema de las comunicaciones. Habla de DeepSeek, habla de la destilación de modelos por parte de los grandes modelos hecho por DeepSeek, algo que quieren proteger, es lógico, y que en el AI Action Plan de América, que os estoy comentando tanto, queda reflejado, ¿no?, esa preocupación y la idea de evitar esto. Y de ver a nivel de inteligencia humana o inteligencia de países, qué hace el otro país, ¿no? Porque claro, aquí ponen el ejemplo de la información nuclear, pero puede ser también otro tipo de información que llegue a ellos y bueno, no les hace mucha gracia. Pero claro, aquí ellos solo ven la guerra Estados Unidos-China y el resto, ¿qué? ¿Aplaudimos a los americanos o les tiramos patatas a los chinos porque son los malos? A ver, esta gente tiene una visión tan prepotente y egocéntrica, conseguida por el dinero y el capitalismo en el sentido negativo. Soy un enemigo del capitalismo. Que bueno, eso sí que asusta, ¿no? La polarización que se está dando. Black Box IA, propaganda. El enemigo común funciona en todo. Sí, se necesita un enemigo y Estados Unidos ha creado uno que es China. O los BRICS. En este caso es China. Bueno, yo diría los BRICS, fíjate, pero bueno, comandado por China, obviamente. Hay que empezar a escuchar a los líderes chinos, si no, solo veremos la cara de una moneda. No, exactamente. Exactamente. Y a nivel de desarrollo, empresas, bueno, que no lo decidan ellos, que lo decida la sociedad. ¿Por qué tenemos que estar alineados a una zona u otra a nivel tecnológico? Europa podría decir, oye, yo no soy dueño de nadie. Puedo tener alianzas, pero en un sentido y en el otro. Y al final yo también voy a desarrollar mis cosas. Voy a ir más lento porque no estoy al nivel ahora mismo, pero aquí hay muchísimo talento. Aquí hay muchísimo mercado. Por lo tanto, dándome cuenta de lo importante que es esto, yo también voy a actuar. Claro, eso es lo que no quieren. Lo que quieren es, oye, cómprame a mí, yo soy el rico y Europa son los aliados. Y que ni se le ocurre comprar a China. Hombre, pero eso no es una narrativa humanista. Eso es como la cara de este hombre, que es verdad que me parece brillante, lleva 25 minutos, pero es muy bueno la charla que está dando. y cómo la aborda, pero seamos sinceros, esto tiene, como muy bien dice Black Box IA, otra cara, no, bueno, varias caras, ¿no? Correcto, correcto. Nosotros, dice Alberto Ceni, los chinos tienen claro a dónde van y no se ponen ningún obstáculo. No, es que ellos no creo que estén mirando, sí, miran a Estados Unidos, obvio, pero ellos tienen su propia estrategia y lo tienen muy claro, ¿no? Y el problema no es tanto que sí, es tecnológico, de energía, de computación cuántica, de mil cosas, pero al final van a ganar a Estados Unidos por el modelo de civilización y de sociedad que han creado. Que estamos viéndolo en Estados Unidos y no quiero deciros lo que estamos viendo en España y en Europa. ¿Qué proyecto de civilización nos espera en España? ¿Qué está entrando y qué está saliendo? ¿Qué es lo que se valora aquí? La defensa del bien común, de lo social. Socialcomunismo, nada de excelencia, nada de meritocracia, nada de talento, nada de progreso, de economía, de tecnología, de IA, todo es ética, regulación. Eso en 2, 3, 4, 5 años. Somos la nueva África. Y no pasa nada, ahí hemos perdido un legado histórico. Y no pasa nada, señores, no pasa nada. La gente tiene Netflix, internet, puede jugar a los videojuegos, irse a la playa, tomarse una cerveza, un helado, tener 4 perros, 2 gatos. No tengo nada en contra de los animales, al contrario. ¿Sabéis por dónde voy? Vamos a seguir con la charla.
AI 27 paper.
I have.
And so, for those listening who haven't read it, it's a future vision of the AI in U.S. and China racing towards AI, and at some point the story splits into we're going to slow down and work on alignment, or we're going full out. And spoiler alert: in the race to infinity, humanity vanishes.
So the right outcome will ultimately be some form of deterrence and mutually assured destruction. I wrote a paper with 2 other authors, Dan Hendricks and Alex Wang, where we named it Mutual AI Malfunction. And the idea goes something like this. You're the United States, I'm China, you're ahead of me. At some point you cross a line. You, Peter, cross a line, and I, China, go, this is unacceptable. At some point, it becomes...
In terms of amount of compute and amount of...
It's something you're doing where it affects my sovereignty. Mm-hmm. It's not just words and yelling and an occasional shooting down a jet. It's a real threat to the identity of my country, my economic, what have you. Mm-hmm. Under this scenario, I would be highly tempted to do a cyber attack to slow you down, okay? In mutually assured malfunction, if you will, we have to engineer it so that you have the ability to then do the same thing to me. Mm-hmm. And that causes both of us to be careful not to trigger the other. Yeah. That's what mutual assured destruction is. That's our best formulation right now. We also recommend in our work, and I think it's very strong, that the government require that we know where all the chips are. And remember, the chips can tell you where they are because they're computers.
Yeah.
And it would be easy to add a little crypto thing, which would say, yeah, here I am, and this is what I'm doing. So knowing where the chips are, knowing where the training runs are, and knowing what these fault lines are very important. Now, there are a whole bunch of assumptions in this scenario that I described. The first is that there was enough electricity. The second is that there was enough power. The third is the Chinese had enough electricity, which they do, and enough computing resources, which they may or may not have.
Or may in the future have.
Yeah. And also I'm asserting that everyone arrives at this eventual state of superintelligence at roughly the same time. Again, these are debatable points. But the most interesting scenario is we're saying it's 1938, the letter has come, from Einstein to the president, and we're having a conversation, and we're saying, well, how does this end? Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you were so brilliant in 38, what you would have said is, this ultimately ends with us having a bomb, the other guys having a bomb, and then we're going to have one heck of a negotiation to try to make sure that we don't end up destroying each other. And I think the same conversation needs to get started now, well before the Chernobyl events, well before the build-ups.
just take that one more step and don't answer if you don't want to. But if it was 1947, 1948.
Bueno, de Chernobyl, ¿no? Será de Oppenheimer. De la bomba nuclear que lanzó Estados Unidos, por cierto. Bueno, ha dicho varias cosas. El documento de AI 2027 de Kokolorov, bueno, de un ex miembro de... A ver, voy a leerlo porque yo para los nombres soy fatal, me perdonáis. Yo sé que me lo perdonáis. Está creado por Daniel Cocotaclo. Yo soy tremendo. Yo es que para los nombres soy fatal, lo siento. AI 2027, ¿no? Daniel Cocotaclo. Bueno, ya lo vimos aquí. De todas formas, vamos a ponerlo para que no lo recuerde. Aquí hay un... Aquí es un informe, esto tenéis una página que es AI-2027.com y nada, es un informe donde tenéis aquí la narrativa que está comentando. Hicimos 2 programas al respecto, ¿vale? Hicimos 2 programas al respecto. Entonces, nada, podéis consultarlo. Mi conclusión es que la información o la narrativa era tremendamente infantil, tremendamente centrada en Estados Unidos como lo único, el origen del mundo, y declarando enemigo a China. Como dice aquí Eric Schmidt, bueno, van a tener que llegar un momento en que lleguen a un acuerdo, ¿no? Porque si uno tiene una bomba y otro tiene otra bomba, pero habla de cosas como, oye, que los chips tengan un ID. Que, bueno, pero es que al final, ¿quiénes son ellos para controlar todo esto? ¿Quién es Estados Unidos para controlar esto? No, somos nosotros, somos los que desarrollan la civilización y el mundo y queremos en cada chip poner un ID. Bueno, pues si eso lo hace China, los acribillan. ¿Y el resto del mundo? ¿No son considerados humanos que deban participar en esa visión o desarrollo? Y si piensan diferente, bueno, si piensan diferente, acabaremos con ellos. Ah, esta es la narrativa estadounidense de los buenos. Vaya usted, por Dios, a no negarles ni darles la razón. Entonces somos esclavos. ¿Seremos esclavos de China o de Estados Unidos? ¿No somos libres? Entonces, ¿en qué punto estamos? Bueno, me parece algo, es que me parece algo terrible y muy importante la imagen que está dando Eric Schmidt, porque es lo que en definitiva nos tiene que hacer abrir los ojos. A ver, Alberto Zenit, su propio sistema les da ventaja sí, a China, sí. Que nosotros, yo particularmente no quiero ser una China 2.0, pero habría que ver qué tipo de sistema queremos hacer, ¿no? Abogado, los chinos están proponiendo un acuerdo en conjunto para el desarrollo futuro de la IA. No creo que USA o Estados Unidos acepte. Es que el problema, aquí esto está, bueno, que no lo quería anticipar, que es el acuerdo, el anuncio del plan de acción de China. Es lo que dice Abogado. Además, a ver. Y además estáis apuntando aquí con todo el tema de la computación cuántica, todo el tema espacial, todo el tema de muchas cosas. Y cosas que no se sabrán. Dice Black Boss, entiendo que se necesita libertad legislativa. La IA en China es un bien común y no tiene derechos. Es una nueva revolución sociotecnológica y China va a ello, a una, pero para bien o mal. Yo estoy más con la narrativa, uso y visión china totalmente. Y esto me está haciendo que pensar, pero que ya lo pensaba, ¿no? Que quizá tengamos que hacer una apuesta. Lo que pasa es que Europa podría virar hacia China, manteniendo relaciones con Estados Unidos y creando su propia tecnología. Bueno, vamos a un momento crítico en Europa. Y para las empresas y compañías, si en Europa no te dejan hacer nada, en Europa ya sabemos la visión que tienen, pues toca irse claro, a países del oeste, pero de oriente. Pero esto puede ser tela. Porque claro, Estados Unidos no llegaría a un acuerdo con China porque es una forma de, oye, China está ganando y tenemos que llegar a un acuerdo. Estados Unidos quiere llegar a un acuerdo cuando sea la ganadora. Porque si no, tiene la de perder. Ahí quien habría ganado sería China, si llegan a un acuerdo. Y más ahora, porque quien pierde el partido es Estados Unidos.
So before the Cold War really took off. And you say, well, that's similar to where we are with China right now. We have a competitive lead, but it may or may not be fragile. What would you do differently in 1947, 1948, or what would Kissinger do different in 1947, 1948, 1949 than what we did do?
You know, I wrote 2 books with Dr. Kissinger, and I miss him very much. He was my closest friend. And Henry was very much a realist in the sense that when you look at his history in roughly 36, 38, he and his, I guess 37, 38, his family were Jewish, were forced to emigrate from Germany because of the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
And he watched the entire world that he'd grown up with as a boy be destroyed by the Nazis and by Hitler. And then he saw the conflagration that occurred as a result. And I can tell you that whether you like him or not, he spent the rest of his life trying to prevent that from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
So we are today safe because people like Henry saw the world fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from my perspective, we should be very careful in our language and our strategy to not start that process. Henry's view on China was different from other China scholars. His view in China was that we shouldn't poke the bear, that we shouldn't talk about Taiwan too much, and we let China deal with her own problems, which are very significant. But he was worried that we or China, in a small way, would start World War III in the same way that World War I was started. You remember that World War I started with essentially a small geopolitical event, which was quickly escalated for political reasons on all sides.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest was a horrific war, the war to end all wars at the time. So we have to be very, very careful when we have these conversations, not to isolate each other. Henry started a number of what are called track 2 dialogues, which I'm part of one of them, to try to make sure we're talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody who's a hardcore person would say, well, you know, we're Americans and we're better and so forth. Well, I can tell you, having spent lots of time on this, the Chinese are very smart, very capable, very much a peer. And if you're confused about that, again, look at the arrival of DeepSeek. A year ago, I said they were 2 years behind.
Mm-hmm.
I was clearly wrong. With enough money and enough power, they're in the game.
Yeah.
Let me actually drill in just a little bit more on that too, because I think one of the reasons DeepSeek caught up so quickly is because it turned out that inference time generates a lot of IQ, and I don't think anyone saw that coming. And inference time is a lot easier to catch up on. And also, if you take one of our big open source models and distill it, and then make it a specialist, like you were saying a minute ago, and then you put a ton of inference time compute behind it, it's a massive advantage and also a massive leak of capability within CBRN, for example, that nobody anticipated.
And CBRN, remember, is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
Let me rephrase what you said. If the structure of the world in 5 to 10 years is 10 models, and I'll make some numbers up, 5 in the United States, 3 in China, 2 elsewhere. And those models are data centers that are multi-gigawatts. They will be all nationalized in some way.
Mm-hmm.
In China, they will be owned by the government.
Mm-hmm.
The stakes are too high.
Mm-hmm.
In my military work one day, I visited a place where we keep our plutonium. And we keep our plutonium in a base that's inside of another base with even more machine guns and even more specialized, because the plutonium is so interesting and obviously very dangerous.
Yeah.
And I believe it's the only 1 or 2 facilities that we have in America. So in that scenario, these data centers will have the equivalent of guards and machine guns because they're so important. Now, is that a stable geopolitical system? Absolutely. You know where they are. President of one country can call the other. They can have a conversation. You know, they can agree on what they agree on and so forth. But let's say it is not true. Let's say that the technology improves, again, unknown, to the point where the kind of technologies that I'm describing are implementable on the equivalent of a small server.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a humongous data center proliferation problem. And that's where the open source issue is so important, because those servers, which will be proliferate throughout the world, will all be on open source. We have no control regime for that. Now, I'm in favor of open source, as you mentioned earlier with Mark Andreessen, that open competition and so forth tends to allow people to run ahead. In defense of the proprietary companies, collectively, they believe, as best I can tell, that the open source models can't scale fast enough because they need this heavyweight training. If you look, I'll give you an example of Grok is trained on a single cluster that was built by NVIDIA in 20 days or so forth in Memphis, Tennessee, of 200,000 GPUs. A GPU is about $50,000. You can say it's about a $10 billion supercomputer in one building that does one thing, right? If that is the future, then we're okay, because we'll be able to know where they are.
Yeah.
If, in fact, the arrival of intelligence is ultimately a distributed problem, then we're going to have lots of problems with terrorism, bad actors, North Korea, poorly funded countries.
Which is my greatest concern, right? China and the U.S. are rational actors.
Yeah.
The terrorist who has access to this, and I don't want to go all negative on this podcast. It's an important thing to wake people up to the deep thinking you've done on this. My concern is the terrorist who gains access, and are we spending enough time and energy, and are we training enough models to watch them?
So the companies are doing this. There's a body of work happening now, which can be understood as follows. You have a super intelligent model. Can you build a model that's not as smart as the student it's studying? You know, there is a professor that's watching the student, but the student is smarter than the professor. Is it possible to watch what it does? It appears that we can. It appears that there's a way. Even if you have this rogue, incredible thing, we can watch it and understand what it's doing and thereby control it. Another example of where we don't know is that it's very clear that these savant models will proceed. There's no question about that. The question is, how do we get the Einsteins? So there are two possibilities. One, and this is to discover completely new schools of thought.
Which is what's the most exciting thing in the next few years. Yeah.
And in our book, Genesis, Henry and I and Craig talk about the importance of polymaths in history. In fact, the first chapter is on polymaths. What happens when we have millions and millions of polymaths? Very, very interesting. Okay. Now, it looks like the great discoveries, the greatest scientists and people in our history had the following property. They were experts in something, and they looked at a different problem, and they saw a pattern in one area of thinking that they could apply to a completely unrelated field, and they were able to do so and make a huge breakthrough. The models today are not able to do that. So one thing to watch for is algorithmically, when can they do that? This is generally known as the non-stationarity problem, because the reward functions in these models are fairly straightforward. You know, beat the human, beat the question, and so forth. But when the rules keep changing, is it possible to say the old rule can be applied to a new rule to discover something new? So and again, the research is underway. We won't know for years.
Peter and I were over at OpenAI yesterday, actually, and we were talking to many people, but Noam Brown in particular. And I said the word of the year is scaffolding. And he said, yeah, maybe the word of the month is scaffolding. I was like, well, okay, what did I step on there? He said, look, you know, right now, if you try to get the AI to discover relativity or, you know, just some greenfield opportunity, it won't do it. If you set up a framework, kind of like a lattice, like a trellis, the vine will grow on the trellis beautifully. But you have to lay out those pathways and breadcrumbs. He was saying the AI's ability to generate its own scaffolding is imminent. That doesn't make it completely self-improving. It's not Pandora's box, but it's also much deeper down the path of create an entire breakthrough in physics or create an entire feature-length movie, or, you know, these prompts that require 20 hours of consecutive inference time compute. Pretty much sure that will be a 2025 thing, at least from their point of view.
So recursive self-improvement is the general term for the computer continuing to learn.
Yeah.
We've already crossed that in the sense that these systems are now running and learning things, and they're learning from the way they think within limited functions. When does the system have the ability to generate its own objective and its own question? Does not have that today.
Yep.
That's another sign. Another sign would be that the system decides to exfiltrate itself, and it takes steps to get itself away from the control and command system. That has not happened yet.
Gemini hasn't called you yet and said, "Hi, Eric."
Okay, can I tell
But there are theoreticians who believe that the systems will ultimately choose that as a reward function, because they're programmed to continue to learn. Another one is access to weapons, right, and lying to get it. So these are tripwires, right? Each of which is a tripwire that we're watching. And again, each of these could be the beginning of a mini Chernobyl event that would become part of consciousness. I think at the moment, the US government is not focused on these issues. They're focused on other things, economic opportunity, growth, and so forth. It's all good. But somebody's going to get focused on this, and somebody's going to pay attention to it, and it will ultimately be a problem.
A quick aside, you probably heard me speaking about Fountain Life before.
Bueno, está siendo una charla apasionante. Habla de Kissinger. Aquí ha dicho algo Alberto Zenit que es clave. Dice Alberto Zenit, creo que Kissinger tiene mucho que ver con que China esté donde está. Obvio. Es decir, porque todo lo que hizo Kissinger en los años 70, estableciendo lazos con China a nivel diplomático y en definitiva empoderando a China, pues quizá lo tendría que haber pensado, quizá empoderar a China con esa narrativa antisoviética o antirrusa, pues ha derivado en que ahora esté donde está, ¿no? Que hayan tomado nota y que de alguna manera se hayan posicionado donde estén. Kissinger, judío, que dicen que es una leyenda, pero bueno, hay bastante información al respecto. Parece ser que no era muy amante de España o quería una España controlada o subyugada al poder, ¿no? Se dice muchas cosas en este sentido entre Kissinger y su relación con España, ¿no? Curioso que Eric Schmidt dijera o dice que no se hable mucho de Taiwán o estos, que en definitiva que no se cabrea al oso, hablando de China. Y al final cuando escuchas a esta gente, lo que te das cuenta es que les importa una mierda la humanidad. Es que lo voy a decir así claramente. Estos solo quieren el control absoluto, como bien dice Eric Schmidt, saber dónde, como Grok o como xAI, si tienen 200.000 tarjetas, pues estarán en un data center concreto, qué es lo que se está haciendo. Y dice, bueno, que en un estado en que puedan haber 5 empresas de ASI de Estados Unidos, de 3 en China y 2 en otros países, pero ¿por qué no dicen 2 en Estados Unidos, 2 en Europa? Y el escenario es uno que no es favorable a América. Es que se les ve demasiado. Es que la revolución es humana. Hablan de génesis y no tienen en cuenta una génesis humana. Voy a escribir bastante en Human X sobre esto, porque estamos viviendo una narrativa que tiene poco de humanista. Hablan de los riesgos, hablan de la paz, de llegar a acuerdos, pero esto es un combate de gallitos. Bueno, no me parece tanto desde el punto de vista de China, pero China la guerra y la pelea siempre la hace en silencio. Entonces, cuidado con esto. Hablan de Corea del Norte. Es cuando llegue toda esta información a los terroristas. ¿Quiénes son los terroristas para Estados Unidos? ¿Ha sido alguna vez Estados Unidos un país terrorista? ¿Cómo podemos autocontrolar al que provee de las ASIs? ¿Quién controla al dueño de las ASIs? Habla evidentemente de la aplicación en el ámbito militar. Podría él haber dicho cosas al respecto, puesto que tiene empresas en las que ha invertido, ¿no? Se ve que lo ve interesante. El negocio de la muerte trae mucho dinero. Habla de que los modelos sí que están en el punto de automejora, que ya lo estuvimos hablando en ese programa, que es uno de los más escuchados, de Self-Improving, pero dice que aún no están en el punto de desarrollar sus propios propósitos, objetivos y preguntas, su propio andamiaje y ruta, ¿no? Pero que están muy cerca de eso. Yo creo que evidentemente son los modelos que estarán desarrollando y supondrían esa arquitectura cognitiva más allá de estos modelos, y entiendo que es lo que vendrá pre-AGI o en la era AGI, ¿no? Vamos a ver cosas que estáis comentando aquí. Abogado del diablo, los últimos papers, el AlphaGo Moment y el Hierarchical Reasoning Model, sí, estos tengo que hacer programas sobre ellos, lo he dicho al principio. Son técnicas que sirven también para el open source, sí, por supuesto. Sí, voy a hacer programas, uno es del AlphaGo Moment, otro es del Hierarchical Reasoning Models, que hay varios, y de alguno más, que suponen una reflexión sobre las limitaciones en positivo de estas arquitecturas y optimizaciones y, en definitiva, arquitecturas ASI, ¿no? Hay un Arch ASI, que es el que me voy a centrar, con lo que entonces los programas de la semana que viene, bueno, voy a tomar mi tiempo para hacer algunos programas más a nivel técnico. A mí me parece, dice Abogado, perdón, a mí me parece completamente irregulable esta tecnología. Lo es. No se entiende. O sí que se entiende, pero están acojonados a nivel máximo. Y esto nos lleva a una guerra civilizatoria o hacia un gran avance o hacia la destrucción del mundo medieval y la emergencia de un nuevo paradigma o proyecto civilizatorio liderado por China. Yo es que veo que o Estados Unidos es capaz de reflexionar de sus errores y ponerse las pilas, que yo entiendo que sí que lo pueden hacer. Ese AI Action Plan es parte de eso, o vamos a ver un cambio de tablero importante en el mundo, donde Europa y España no pintan nada, más que el folclore propio de nuestro país y la inutilidad de nuestra clase política y la psicopatía de la sociedad en general, o casi en un porcentaje muy alto. En definitiva, si la sociedad española estuviera a otro nivel, no ocurriría o tomaría acción o tendría interés. No nos podemos comparar con China ni con otros países. Nos hemos quedado detrás como sociedad, como civilización. Somos ya segundo o tercer mundo. Entonces, si reflexionamos profundamente sobre eso, pues lo entenderemos. Hoy daba una noticia, el LinkedIn lo ha publicado, creo que subía el 1200% en gente joven en ingresos por depresión. Somos culpables de la sociedad que hemos creado y nos da igual. Ya está. Es que el Internet es una anarquía. Joker, joder. Abogado del diablo nombró varias red flags que parece ya haberse saltado su sistema. Sí, lo he comentado. Cosas que la gente cree que no. Y es que estos pequeños técnicos que muchas veces tienen buena voluntad, pero que les gusta mucho el marketing, la IA y la tecnología, pero que de esto no tienen ni puta idea porque les viene grande, yo creo que lo que tienen que hacer es una de dos, o intentar aprender o intentar entender el cambio e intentar transformar sus narrativas, o no dogmatizar aquello que ignoran, es decir, bajar la narrativa a lo suyo, que es el vender IA y vender que ellos son muy buenos, pero no meterse en otros berenjenales que les vienen grandes. Alberto, eres muy bueno. Yo te compro muchas cosas que dices. Esta es muy buena, esta frase de Alberto de Zenit. El infierno son los otros. Esa frase, mira, me la voy a apuntar y te la voy a copiar. Es muy buena. No sé si es de un libro, si es de un libro, pónmelo. Pero si es tuya, pues nada. Pero que si es de referencia de algo. Pero que es esa la reflexión. Es que es el resumen del programa. El infierno son los otros. Y cuidado, no significa que en los otros pueda haber una maldad que haya que combatir y que nosotros estemos en lo cierto, ¿de acuerdo? Porque no todo es posible y tolerable. Cuidado con esto también. Pero es que el discurso de esta gente es eso. Ya, a ver, eso, escuchamos una cosa, es una visión muy infantil y simplista, ¿no? Los terroristas para Estados Unidos son los comunistas. Y para España, que vivimos en un país socialcomunista, pues también es el problema del comunismo, sí. Todo anticapitalista es terrorista. No, no, eso no es cierto. No tiene por qué ser así. Y esos clichés de habría que ver muy bien qué es capitalismo, qué es comunismo. Abogado del Diablo dice, es que yo no estoy seguro de querer que Estados Unidos sea el líder en tecnología y controle los sistemas. Exactamente, yo tampoco. Ya está. ¿Qué van a hacer? ¿Silenciarnos? ¿Comprarnos? ¿Con renta básica universal? ¿Que lo cogerán todos a manos abiertas? Alguien superará al otro en algún momento de manera ya inalcanzable. Yo eso no te lo compro, abogado. Yo creo que aunque sean superados, yo creo que van a haber acuerdos de paz. Si no existen acuerdos de paz, vamos a una guerra mundial. Porque Estados Unidos ya se siente amenazado. Estos discursos son de país con miedo. De imperio en declive. Y quien quede atrás veremos si lo acepta o aprieta todos los botones rojos que tenga a mano. Pues eso, exactamente. Camus, ¿quién es? Alberto Camus. A ver. El infierno son los otros, sí, ¿no? La frase el infierno son los otros es una de las más conocidas del filósofo existencialista francés Jean-Paul Sartre. Pues dice esto. La frase aparece en la obra de Sartre a puerta cerrada. Pues nada, no sé, dice que no es de Camus, que es de Jean-Paul Sartre. Pues muy bien. Bueno, a ver si hay algún mensaje más en el chat. No, bueno. Seguimos. Muy interesante, de las mejores charlas.
Movie version of AI, you describe
And to gain access to the therapeutics to give them decades of extra health span. Learn more about what's going on inside your body from Fountain Life. Go to fountainlife.com/Peter and tell them Peter sent you. Okay, back to the episode.
Can I clear up one kind of common misconception there? Because I think it's a really important one. In the movie version of AI, you described, hey, maybe there are 10 big AIs, and 5 are in the US, 3 are in China, and 2 are, one's not in Brussels probably, one's maybe in Dubai.
Or Israel.
Israel, okay, there you go.
Somewhere like that.
Yeah. In the movie version of this, if it goes rogue, the SWAT team comes in, they blow it up, and it's solved. But the actual real world is when you're using one of these huge data centers to create a super intelligent AI, the training process is 10E26, 10E28, or more flops. But then the final brain can be ported and run on 4 GPUs, 8 GPUs. Right. So a box about this size. And it's just as intelligent. It's and that's one of the beautiful things about it.
This is called stealing the weights.
Stealing the weights, yeah. Exactly. And the new thing is that weight file if you have an innovation in inference time speed, and you say, oh, same weights, no difference, distill it or just quantize it or whatever, but I made it 100 times faster. Now it's actually far more intelligent than what you exported from the data center. And so
But all of these are examples of the proliferation problem. Yeah. And I'm not convinced that we will hold these things in the 10 places. Mm-hmm. And here's why. Let's assume you have the 10, which is possible. They will have subsets of models that are smaller, but nearly as intelligent. And so the tree of knowledge, of systems that have knowledge, is not going to be 10 and then 0. It's going to be 10, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000, 1 billion at different levels of complexity. So the system that's on your future phone may be, 3 orders of magnitude, 4 order of magnitude smaller than the one at the very tippy top, but it will be very, very powerful.
To exactly what you're talking about, there's some great research going on at MIT. It'll probably move to Stanford, just to be fair, but it always does. But it's great research going on at MIT on if you have one of these huge models and it's been trained on movies, it's been trained on Swahili, a lot of the parameters aren't useful for this savant use case, but the general knowledge and intuition is. So what's the optimal balance between narrowing the training data and narrowing the parameter set to be a specialist without losing general, learning?
So the people who are opposed to that view, and again, we don't know, would say the following. If you take a general purpose model and you specialize it through fine tuning, it also becomes more brittle.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Their view is that what you do is you just make bigger and bigger and bigger models because they're in the big model camp, right?
Yep.
And that's why they need gigawatts of data centers and so forth. And their argument is that that flexibility of intelligence that they are seeing will continue. Dario wrote a piece called basically about machines, and he argued that there are
machines of grace,
machines of amazing grace, I think.
Grace, no.
And he argued that there are three scaling laws playing. The first one is what you know of, which is foundation model growth. We're still on that.
Yeah.
The second one is a test time training law. And the third one is a reinforcement learning training law.
Mm-hmm.
Training laws are where if you just put more hardware and more data, they just get smarter in a predictable way. We're just at the beginning, in his view, of the second and third one beginning. That's why I'm sure our audience would be frustrated. Why do we not know? We don't know, right? It's too new, it's too powerful. And at the moment, all of these businesses are incredibly highly valued. They're growing incredibly quickly. The uses of them, I mentioned earlier, going back to Google, the ability to refactor your entire workflow in a business is a very big deal. That's a lot of money to be made there for all the companies involved. We will see.
Eric, shifting the topic, one of the concerns that people have in the near term, and people have been, ringing the alarm bells, is on jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering where you come out on this, and flipping that forward to education. How do we educate our kids today in high school and college? And what's your advice? So on the first thing, do you believe that, as Dario has gone on, TV shows now and speaking to significant white-collar job loss, we're seeing obviously a multitude of different drivers and robots coming in. How do you think about the job market over the next 5 years?
Let's posit that in 30 or 40 years, there'll be a very different employment, robotic, human interaction.
Or the definition of do we need to work at all?
The definition of work, the definition of identity. Let's just posit that. And let's also posit that it will take 20 or 30 years for those things to work through the economy of our world. Now in California and other cities in America, you can get on a Waymo taxi. Waymo is 2025. The original work was done in the late 90s. Yes. The original challenge at Stanford was done, I believe, in 2004.
The Doppler Grand Challenge. It was 2004.
Right. 2004.
Sebastian threw in.
That's right.
One.
So more than 20 years from a visible demonstration to our ability to use it in daily life. Why? It's hard, it's deep tech, it's regulated and all of that. And I think that's going to be true, especially in robots that are interacting with humans. They're going to get regulated. You're not going to be wandering around and the robot's going to decide to slap you. It just doesn't, society's not going to allow that sort of thing.
To.
It's just not, it's not going to allow it. Yeah. So in the shorter term, 5 or 10 years, I'm going to argue that this is positive for jobs in the following way.
Okay.
If you look at the history of automation and economic growth, automation starts with the lowest status and most dangerous jobs, and then works up the chain. So if you think about assembly lines in cars and furnaces and all these sort of very, very dangerous jobs that our forefathers did, they don't do them anymore. They're done by robotic solutions of one another, and typically not a humanoid robot, but an arm. So the world dominated by arms that are intelligent and so forth will automate those functions. What happens to the people? Well, it turns out that the person who was working with the welder, who's now operating the arm, has a higher wage. And the company has higher profits because it's producing more widgets. Mm-hmm. So the company makes more money and the person makes more money, right, in that sense. Now, you sit there and say, well, that's not true because humans don't want to be retrained. But in the vision that we're talking about, every single person will have a computer assistant that's very intelligent that helps them perform.
Mm-hmm.
And you take a person of normal intelligence or knowledge and you add a, sort of accelerant, they can get a higher paying job. So you sit there and you go, well, why are there more jobs? There should be less jobs. That's not how economics works. Economics expands because the opportunities expands, profits expands, wealth expands, and so forth. So there's plenty of dislocation, but in aggregate, are there more people employed or fewer? The answer is more people with higher paying jobs.
Is that true in India as well?
No,
It will be. And you picked India because India has a positive demographic outlook, although their birth rate is now down to 2.0.
That's good.
Is it?
The rest of the world is choosing not to have children.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Korea, it's now down to 0.7 children per 2 parents.
Yeah.
China is down to 1 child per 2 parents.
It's evaporating.
Now, what happens in those situations? They completely automate everything because it's the only way to increase national priority. So the most likely scenario, at least in the next decade, is it's a national emergency to use more AI in the workplace to give people better paying jobs and create more productivity in the United States because our birth rate has been falling. And what happens is people have talked about this for 20 years. If you have this conversation and you ignore demographics, which is negative for humans, and economic growth, which occurs naturally because of capital investment, then you miss the whole story. Now, there are plenty of people who lose their jobs, but there's an awful lot of people who have new jobs. Mm-hmm. And the typical simple example would be all those people who work in Amazon distribution centers and Amazon trucks. Those jobs didn't exist until Amazon was created, right? The number one shortage in jobs right now in America are truck drivers. Yes. Why? Truck driving is a lonely, hard, low-paying, right, low status of good people job. Mm-hmm. They don't want it. They want a better paying job, right? Going back to education, it's really a crime that our industry has not invented the following product. The product that I want it to build is a product that teaches every single human who wants to be taught in their language, in a gamified way, the stuff they need to know to be a great citizen in their country, right? That can all be done on phones now. It can all be learned and you can all learn how to do it. And why do we not have that product, right? The investment in the humans of the world is the best return always. Yeah. Knowledge and capability is always the right answer.
Let me try and get your opinion on this because you're so...
Bueno, esto que dice no se lo cree ni borracho. Bueno, a ver, antes que nada, nombrar lo que ha dicho antes, que uno de los países será Israel. Israel es el que nadie nombra en inteligencia artificial, pero Israel va a estar ahí, como uno de esos países potencia. Y más en el uso de aplicación militar, obviamente. Y Rusia, India, bueno, Japón. Lo del empleo y la educación, evidentemente la gran preocupación que existe, ¿no? del impacto en el trabajo. Y dice que no, que hombre, que la gente no tiene hijos y que ahora los datos demográficos que hay que tenerlos en cuenta y que realmente al final va a haber un gran impacto y movimiento, pero que realmente lo que se va a conseguir es trabajos mejor remunerados. Eso es una falacia y una mentira. Y ahí están todos los informes y análisis que hemos hecho a nivel mundial de muchos informes, entre ellos del Foro Económico Mundial y otros. Y el impacto va a ser brutal y no se va a crear nuevo trabajo al mismo ritmo, con lo que tenemos un problema. Y más, por ejemplo, en Europa, con una inmigración descontrolada y con un gasto social insostenible. Con lo que entonces vamos al auténtico caos, a la renta básica universal, pero para nada a un progreso o a que llegues a una empresa y te ofrezcan el oro y el moro porque trabajes para ellos con condiciones creadas por la inteligencia artificial que parezca que estemos en el paraíso. Señor Eric Schmidt, no sé qué ha fumado, pero evidentemente aquí se ha sacado usted la patita globalista de Jamelín para que entendamos que esto no va a pasar nada, pero vamos a entrar todos en una dinámica que es de todo menos progresista, de todo menos libertaria o de libertad, y que nos lleva a un universo 25 que con usted, con la calma que tiene, con ese talante, con su taza, con sus millones, puede decir y argumentar, pero debería caerse en la cara de vergüenza y como mínimo no trasladar un escenario de duda, de crítica, de estudio, de impacto, y no solo en Estados Unidos, amigo mío, no solo en Estados Unidos, sino en el mundo. en el mundo, que hay más gente. Aquí dice unas reflexiones de Alejandro Ruiz, bastante acertadas. Dice, cualquier acercamiento serio a China y Estados Unidos se desentiende de Europa y dejar que China y Rusia asfixien lo poco que quede de Europa. Pues sí. Si lo dejamos, Alejandro sigue diciendo, antes de que eso ocurra, la Unión Europea se desintegrará y cada país se alineará con quien crea conveniente. Imaginad a España andando sola. Bueno, España se podría alinear con los países latinoamericanos, Iberoamérica, y crear una tercera región, pero un tercer liderazgo, pero no van a dejar ni China ni Estados Unidos. Pero sería una gran opción. La desintegración de Europa y España liderando un nuevo humanismo desde iberoamericano, hispánico, o como queráis llamarle. Alberto Zenit, China va a meter la cuña todo lo que pueda entre Estados Unidos y Europa, obvio. Abogado del diablo, jeje, quizá los chinos van hacia la utopía post-escasez comunista secretamente y Estados Unidos va a tratar de mantener las dinámicas capitalistas empujando más hacia la distopía espantosa. Pero si China es más capitalista que capitalista, ¿no? Aquí tenéis unas visiones un poco distorsionadas. Habría que crear trabajos que no pudieran hacer las máquinas. No se me ocurre ninguno. Pues eso. Ay, que me meo. Pero vamos a ver. Dice, habría que crear trabajos que no pudieran hacer las máquinas. No se me ocurre ninguno. Y yo te pongo, a las máquinas sí que se le ocurren. Bueno. Perla negra. Terminator me dejó sin laburo. Pero bueno, la renta básica universal que seguro gustará a muchos. Pues nada. Alberto Zenit, Europa, Estados Unidos del norte de África. Del norte de África. La nueva África es Europa. Emia Martín, que es el amigo Alberto, creo. ¿Y qué ocurriría si China decidiera dejar de suministrar los robots al resto del mundo? Pues por eso se están partiendo el culo de risa con todos estos debates y pamplinas. Ellos ya han ganado.
So I've got about 1,000 people in the companies where I'm the controlling shareholder. And I've been trying to tell them exactly what you just articulated, where a lot of these people have been in the company for 10, 15 years. They're incredibly capable and loyal, but they've learned a specific white-collar skill. They worked really hard to learn the skill. And the AI is coming within no more than 3 years, and maybe 2 years. And the opportunity to retrain and have continuity is right now. Mm-hmm. But if they delay, which everyone seems to be just, let's wait and see. And what I'm trying to tell them is if you wait and see, you're really screwing over that employee.
So we are in wild agreement that this is going to happen. And the winners, we are the ones who act now. What's interesting is when you look at innovation history, the biggest companies who you would think of are the slowest because they have economic resources that the little companies typically don't. They tend to eventually get there, right? So watch what the big companies do. Mm-hmm. Are their CFOs and the people who measure things carefully, who are very, very intelligent, they say, I'm done with that 1,000 engineering team that doesn't do very much. I want 50 people working in this other way, and we'll do something else with the other people.
And when you say big companies, we're thinking Google, Meta. We're not thinking, big bank hasn't done anything.
I'm thinking about big banks. When I talk to CEOs, and I know a lot of them in traditional industries, what I counsel them is you already have people in the company who know what to do. You just don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. So call a review of the best ideas to apply AI in our business. And inevitably, the first ones are boring. Improve customer service, improve call centers, and so forth. But then somebody says, we could increase revenue if we built this product. I'll give you another example. There's this whole industry of people who work on regulated user interfaces or one or another. I think user interfaces are largely going to go away because if you think about it, the agents speak English typically or other languages. You can talk to them. You can say what you want. The UI can be generated. So I can say, generate me a set of buttons that allows me to solve this problem, and it's generated for you. Why do I have to be stuck in what is called the WIMP interface, Windows icons, menus, and pull down, that was invented in Xerox PARC, right? 50 years ago. Why am I still stuck in that paradigm? I just want it to work.
kids in high school and college now.
Aquí he hablado de algo que es muy interesante, que es el fin del desarrollo de las aplicaciones y sobre todo el fin de las interfaces de usuario, ¿no? En definitiva van a ser dinámicas. Algo que hace tiempo ya aventuré, pero que bueno, tampoco pasa nada. Es algo lógico y sentido común.
Any different recommendations for where they go?
When you spend any time in a high school, or I was at a conference yesterday where we had a drone challenge, and you watch the 15-year-olds, they're going to be fine. They're just going to be fine. It all makes sense to them, and we're in their way. If
They're
I were
digital natives.
But they're more than digital natives. They get it. They understand the speed. It's natural to them. They're also, frankly, faster and smarter than we are, right? That's just how life works, I'm sorry to say. So we have wisdom, they have intelligence, they win, right? So in their case, I used to think the right answer was to go into biology. I now actually think going into the application of intelligence to whatever you're interested in is the best thing you can do as a young person.
Purpose-driven.
Yeah.
Any form of solution that you find interesting. Most kids get into it for gaming reasons or something, and they learn how to program very young. So they're quite familiar with this. I work at a particular university with undergraduates, and they're already doing different algorithms for reinforcement learning as sophomores. This shows you how fast this is happening at their level. They're going to be just fine. They're responding to the economic signals, but they're also responding to their purpose, right? So an example would be you care about climate, which I certainly do. If you're a young person, why don't you figure out a way to simplify the climate science to use simple foundation models to answer these core questions?
Yeah.
Why don't you figure out a way to use these powerful models to come up with new materials, right, that allow us, again, to address the carbon challenge? And why don't you work on energy systems to have better and more efficient energy sources that are not less carbon? You see my point.
You know, I've noticed, because I have kids exactly that era, and there's a very clear step function change, largely attributable, I think, to Google and Apple, that they have the assumption that things will work.
Yeah.
And if you go just a couple of years older, during the WIMP era, like you described it, which I'll attribute more to Microsoft, the assumption is nothing will ever work. Like, if I try to use this thing, it's going to crash. It's going to be torture.
What's also interesting was that in my career, I used to give these speeches about the internet, which I enjoyed, where I said, the great thing about the internet is there's an off button, and you can turn off your on button, and you can actually have dinner with your family, and then you can turn it on after dinner. This is no longer possible. So the distinction between the real world and the digital world has become confusing. But none of us are offline for any significant period of time.
Yeah.
And indeed, the reward system in the world has now caused us to not even be able to fly in peace, right? Drive in peace, take a train in peace.
Starlink is everywhere.
Right. And that ubiquitous connectivity has some negative impact in terms of psychological stress, loss of emotional, physical health, and so forth. But the benefit of that productivity is without question.
Every day I get the strangest compliment. Someone will stop me and say, Peter,
Vamos a ver. La inteligencia artificial, dice Alejandro Ruiz, es geopolítica tecnológica. Llegados a un pacto de no agresión China y Estados Unidos para repartirse Europa tecnológicamente, nunca sería posible por dominio geopolítico. Correcto. Mortinato. La única salida para salir del estancamiento es salir del planeta para tener nuevos horizontes como lo hicieran las anteriores generaciones con la conquista de nuevos continentes. Sí, es una parte de la narrativa y una parte del objetivo. Y sí, yo lo firmo, pero mientras eso llega vamos a tener que lidiar con otros problemas, retos y cosas. Refugio áureo. Creo que el trabajo nunca va a faltar. Trabajo es cualquier actividad humana por la que recibimos retribución. ¿Crees que no habrá nada que alguien esté dispuesto a pagar para que hagamos? No será en una fábrica, pero igual las nuevas actividades profesionales. Sí, yo creo que hay... a ver, pero igual sean... Espera, que se había cortado el mensaje. ¿Crees que no habrá nada que alguien esté dispuesto a pagar para que hagamos? No será en una fábrica, pero igual las nuevas actividades profesionales sean hacer compañía a otra persona, contador de historias, consejero. La economía se está moviendo a los servicios. En un futuro los servicios se dividirán en varios tipos y nacerán nuevos sectores. ¿Qué opinas de esto? Que aunque las opciones que pones son un poco a cogerlas en pinzas, sí que tienes razón. Creo que van a crearse nuevas profesiones en esa nueva realidad, que primero vendrá un caos, pero habrá después un nuevo concepto de trabajo que será más enfocada a gamificación, donde habrá muchas cosas que hacer, donde gente pagará porque tú hagas cosas y ahí habrá ciertas retribuciones, ¿no? No sé si enfocadas a servicios, a otro tipo de economía, pero sí que habrá una transformación a ese nivel, a nivel de sociedad, a nivel de tipo de trabajo, qué es el trabajo, y nuevos tipos de trabajo que se derivarán del desarrollo tecnológico que no imaginamos, como lo que estás diciendo tú, a lo mejor hacer a compañía humana o otras cosas que ahora mismo no imaginamos, ¿no? Pero sí, de ahí saldrán, pero habrá mucha más destrucción que creación. Y lo que habrá es un nuevo contrato social y un nuevo concepto de lo que es el trabajo. Como dijo ayer, no sé si fue Sam Altman, ¿quién lo dijo? No me acuerdo. Dice, es el fin del trabajo, perdona, es el fin del empleo, pero no del trabajo. Es una forma de decirlo que me gusta bastante. Oscar Patatán, no creo que haya forma de salir del planeta como seres humanos. Bueno, ahí te lo compro, pero sí como humanos aumentados o humanos X, en definitiva, humanos modificados. Junto con los robots, por supuesto, y otras especies. Alberto Zenit. Qué cabrón. Peluquero canino. Alberto Zenit. Profesiones: peluquero canino, espantapájaros, bueno, granjero, electricista, fontanero, camionero. Es que al final, a ver, tío, sin comentar, macho, gracias. Muy bueno, Alberto Zenit, siempre ahí. Pero quiero decir, un segundo.
Shocking.
Pero,
And
.co and use the code Peter at checkout. All right, back to the episode.
Google I.O. was amazing. I mean, just hats off to the entire team there. VO3 was shocking. And we're sitting here 8 miles from Hollywood. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on the impact this will have. You know, we're going to see the one-person film, feature film, like we're seeing potentially one-person unicorns in the future with agentic AI. Are we going to see an individual be able to compete with a Hollywood studio? And should they be worried about their assets?
Well, they should always be worried because of intellectual property issues and so forth. I think blockbusters are likely to still be put together by people with an awful lot of help by AI. Mm-hmm. I don't think that goes away. If you look at what we can do with generating long-form video, it's very expensive to do long-term video, although that will come down. And also there's an occasional extra leg or extra clock or whatever. It's not perfect yet. Mm-hmm. And that requires human editing. So even in the scenario where a lot of the video is created by a computer, there are going to be humans that are producing it and directing it for reasons. My best example in Hollywood is that, let's use the example, and I was at a studio where they were showing me this. They happened to have an actor who was recreating William Shatner's movements, a young man, and they had licensed the likeness from William Shatner, who's now older, and they put his head on this person's body, and it was seamless. Well, that's pretty impressive. That's more revenue for everyone. The unknown actor becomes a bit more famous. Mr. Shatner gets more revenue. The whole movie genre works. That's a good thing. Another example is that nowadays they use green screens rather than sets. And furthermore, in the alien department, when you have scary movies, instead of having the makeup person, they just add the makeup digitally. Mm-hmm. So who wins? The costs are lower. The movies are made quicker. In theory, the movies are better, right, because you have more choices. So everybody wins. Who loses? Well, there was somebody who built that set. Mm-hmm. And that set isn't needed anymore. That's a carpenter and a very talented person who now has to go get a job in the carpentry business. So again, I think people get confused. If I look at the digital transformation of entertainment, subject to intellectual property being held, which is always a question, it's going to be just fine, right? There's still going to be blockbusters. The cost will go down, not up, or the relative income, because in Hollywood, they essentially have their own accounting and they essentially allocate all the revenue to all the key producing people. The allocation will shift to the people who are the most creative. That's a normal process. Remember we said earlier that automation gets rid of the lowest quality jobs, the most dangerous jobs. The jobs that are sort of straightforward are probably automated, but the really creative jobs. Another example, the script writers, you're still going to have script writers, but they're going to have an awful lot of help from AI to write even better scripts. That's not bad.
Okay. I saw a study recently out of Stanford that documented AI being much more persuasive than the best humans.
Yes.
That set off some alarms. It also set off some interesting thoughts on the future of advertising. Any particular thoughts about that?
So we know the following. We know that if the system knows you well enough, it can learn to convince you of anything. So what that means in an unregulated environment is that the systems will know you better and better. They'll get better at pitching you. And if you're not savvy, if you're not smart, you could be easily manipulated. We also know that the computer is better than humans trying to do the same thing. So none of this surprises me. The real question, and I'll ask this in as a question, is in the presence of unregulated misinformation engines, of which there will be many, advertisers, politicians, just criminal people, people trying to evade responsibility. There's all sorts of people who have free speech. When they have free speech, which includes the ability to use misinformation to their advantage, what happens to democracy?
Yeah.
We've all grown up in democracies where there's a sort of a consensus around trust, and there's an elite that more or less administers the trust vectors and so forth. There's a set of shared values. Do those shared values go away? In our book about Genesis, we talk about this as a deeper problem. What does it mean to be human when you're interacting mostly with these digital things, especially if the digital things have their own scenarios? My favorite example is that you have a son or a grandson or a child or a grandchild, and you give them a bear, and the bear has a personality, and the child grows up, but the bear grows up too. So who regulates what the bear talks to the kid?
Most people haven't actually experienced the super empathetic voice that can be any inflection you want. When they see that, which will be in the next probably 2 months, they're going to completely open their eyes to what this is going to do.
Well, remember that voice casting was solved a few years ago, and that you can cast anyone else's voice onto your own.
Yeah.
And that has all sorts of problems.
Have you seen an avatar yet of somebody that you love that's passed away, or Henry Kissinger or anything like that?
Well, we actually created one with the permission of his family.
Did you start crying instantly?
It's very emotional.
Yeah.
It's very emotional because, it brings back, it's a real human.
Yeah.
It's a real memory, a real voice. And I think we're going to see more of that. Now, one obvious thing that will happen is at some point in the future, when we naturally die, our digital essence will live in the cloud, and it will know what we knew at the time, and you can ask it a question. Yeah. So can you imagine asking Einstein, going back to Einstein, what did you really think about, this other guy?
Yeah.
Did you actually like him, or were you just being polite with him with letters?
Yeah.
Right. And in all those sort of famous contests that we study as students, can you imagine being able to ask the people today, with today's retrospective, what did you really think?
I know that the education example you gave earlier is so much more compelling when you're talking to Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein instead of So coming back to the VO3 and the movies, when one of the first companies we incubated out of MIT, Course Advisor, we sold it to Don Graham in the Washington Post. And then so I was working for him for a year after that. And the conception was, here's the internet, here's the newspaper, let's move the newspaper onto the internet. We'll call it WashingtonPost.com. And if you look at where it ended up, today with Meta, TikTok, YouTube, didn't end up anything like the newspaper moves to the internet. So now here's VO3, here are movies. You can definitely make a long form movie much more cheaply. But I just had this experience of somebody that I know is a complete, this director will try and make a tearjerker by leading me down a 2-hour-long path, but I can get you to that same emotional state in about 5 minutes if it's personalized to you.
Well, one of the things that's happened because of the addictive nature of the internet is we've lost sort of the deep state of reading.
Mm-hmm.
So I was walking around and I saw a Barnes & Noble bookstore.
Still
it was
exists?
big.
Wow.
I went, oh my God, my old home
Did you go
is
in?
back. And I went in and I felt good. But it's a very fond memory. But the fact of the matter is that people's attention spans are shorter.
Yeah.
They consume things quicker. One of the things interesting about sports is the sports highlights business is a huge business, licensed clips around highlights, because it's more efficient than watching the whole game.
Yep.
So I suspect that if you're with your buddies and you want to be drinking and so forth, you put the game on, that's fine. But if you're a busy person and you're busy with whatever you're busy of and you want to know what happened with your favorite team, the highlights are good enough.
Yeah, you got 4 panes of it going at the
right.
same time too.
And so this is, again, a change, and it's a more fundamental change to attention.
Mm-hmm.
I work with a lot of 20-somethings in research. And one of the questions I had is, how do they do research in the presence of all of these stimulations? And I can answer the question definitively. They turn off their phone.
Yeah.
You can't think deeply as a researcher with this thing buzzing. And remember that part of the industry's goal was to fully monetize your attention.
Yeah.
Right. We aside from sleeping, and we're working on having you have less sleep, I guess, from stress, we have essentially tried to monetize all of your waking hours with something, some form of ad, some form of entertainment, some form of subscription. That is completely antithetical to the way humans traditionally work with respect to long, thoughtful examination of principles, the time that it takes to be a good human being. These are in conflict right now. There are various attempts at this. So, my favorite are these digital apps that make you relax. Okay. So the correct thing to do to relax is to turn off your phone, right? And then relax in a traditional way for, 70,000 human years of existence.
I had an incredible experience. I'm doing the flight from MIT to Stanford all the time. And, like you said, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. The TikTok extreme, the clips are so short. This particular flight was my first time brainstorming with Gemini for 6 hours straight. Mm-hmm. And I completely lost track of time. And I'm trying to figure out it's a circuit design, a chip design for inference time compute. And it's so good at brainstorming with me and bringing back data. And as long as the Wi-Fi on the plane is working, time went by. So my first experience with technology that went the other direction.
But notice that you also were not responding to texts and annoyances. You weren't reading ads. You were deep inside of a system for which you paid a subscription.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the deep research stuff, one of the questions I have when you do a deep research analysis, I was looking at factory automation for something. Yeah. Where is the boundary of factory automation versus human automation? It's an area I don't understand very well. It's a very, very deep technical set of problems. I didn't understand it. It took 12 minutes or so to generate this paper. 12 minutes of these supercomputers is an enormous amount of time. What is it doing? Right? And the answer, of course, the product is fantastic.
Yeah. To Peter's question earlier, too, I keep the Google IPO prospectus in my bathroom up in Vermont. It's 2004. I've read it probably 500 times. But I don't know if you remember. It's getting a little ratty, actually, at this stage.
The only person besides me who did the same thing.
Tech farm.
I read it 500 times because I had to.
Because you had to. Well,
it was legally required.
Well, I still read it because of the misconceptions. It's such a great learning experience. But even before the IPO, if you think back, there was this big debate about, will it be ad revenue? Will it be subscription revenue? Will it be paid inclusion? Will the ads be visible? And all this confusion about how you're going to make money with this thing. Now the internet moved to almost entirely ad revenue. But if you look at the AI models, you got your $20, now $200 subscription, and people are signing up like crazy. So, it's ultra convincing. Is that going to be a form of ad revenue where it convinces you to buy something? Or no, is it going to be subscription revenue where people pay a lot more and there's no advertising at all?
No, but you have this with Netflix. There was this whole discussion about how would you fund movies through ads? And the answer is you don't. You have a subscription. And the Netflix people looked at having free movies without a subscription and advertising supported, and the math didn't work. So I think both will be tried. I think the fact of the matter is deep research, at least at the moment, is going to be chosen by well-to-do or professional tasks. You are capable of spending that $200 a month. A lot of people cannot afford it.
Yeah.
And that free service, remember, is the thing that is the stepping stone for that young person, man or woman, who just needs that access. My favorite story there is that when I was at Google and I went to Kenya, and Kenya's a great country, and I was with this computer science professor, and he said, I love Google. And I said, well, I love Google too. And he goes, well, I really love Google. And I said, well, I really love Google too. And I said, why do you really love Google? He said, because we don't have textbooks. And I thought, top computer science program in a nation does not have textbooks.
Yeah. Well, let me
jump in a couple of things here. Eric, in the next few years, what moats actually exist for startups as AI is coming in and disrupting? Do you have a list?
Yes. I'll give you a simple answer.
And what do you look for in the companies that you're investing in?
So first, in the deep tech hardware stuff, there's going to be patents, filings, inventions, the hard stuff. Those things are much slower than the software industry in terms of growth, and they're just as important. Power systems, all those robotic systems we've been waiting for a long time. It's just slower for all sorts of reasons.
Hardware is hard. Yeah.
Hardware is hard for those reasons. In software, it's pretty clear to me, it's going to be really simple. Software is typically a network effect business where the fastest mover wins. The fastest mover is the fastest learner in an AI system. So what I look for is a company where they have a loop. Ideally, they have a couple of learning loops. So I'll give you a simple learning loop. That as you get more people, the more people click, and you learn from their click. They express their preferences. So let's say I invent a whole new consumer thing, which I don't have an idea right now for it, but imagine I did. And furthermore, I said that I don't know anything about how consumers behave, but I'm going to launch this thing. The moment people start using it, I'm going to learn from them, and I'll have instantaneous learning to get smarter about what they want. So I start from nothing. If my learning slope is this, I'm essentially unstoppable. I'm unstoppable because my learning advantage by the time my competitor figures out what I've done is too great. Now, how close can my competitor be and still lose? The answer is a few months because the slopes are exponential. And so it's likely to me that there will be another 10 fantastic Google scale, meta scale companies. They'll all be founded on this principle of learning loops. And when I say learning loops, I mean in the core product solving the current problem as fast as you can. If you cannot define the learning loop, you're going to be beaten by a company that can define it.
And you said 10 meta Google size companies. Do you think there'll also be 1,000? Like if you look at the enterprise software business, Oracle on down, PeopleSoft, whatever, thousands of those, or will they all consolidate into those 10 that are domain dominant learning loop companies?
I think I'm largely speaking about consumer scale because that's where the real growth is. The problem with learning loops is if your customer is not ready for you, you can only learn at a certain rate. So it's probably the case that the government is not interested in learning, and therefore there's no growth in learning loop serving the government. I'm sorry to say, that needs to get fixed. Education systems are largely regulated and run by the unions and so forth. They're not interested in innovation. They're not going to be doing any learning. I'm sorry to say. That has to get fixed. So the ones where there's a very fast feedback signal are the ones to watch. Another example, it's pretty obvious that you can build a whole new stock trading company where you learn, if you get the algorithms right, you learn faster than everyone else, and scale matters. So in the presence of scale and fast learning loops, that's the moat. Now, I don't know that there's many others. You do have...
Do you think brand would be a moat?
Brand matters, but less so. What's interesting is people seem to be perfectly willing now to move from one thing to the other, at least in the digital world. And there's a whole new set of brands that have emerged that everyone is using that are, the next generations that I haven't even heard of.
Within those learning loops, you think domain-specific synthetic data is a big advantage?
Well, the answer is whatever it causes faster learning. There are applications where you have enough training data from humans there are applications where you have to generate the training data from what the humans are doing, right? So you could imagine a situation where you had a learning loop where there's no humans involved, where it's monitoring something, some sensors, but because you learn faster on those sensors, you get so smart, you can't be replaced by another sensor management company. That's the way to think about it.
So what about the capital for the learning loop? Because do you know Daniela Roos, who runs CSAIL at MIT? So Daniela and I are really good friends. We've been talking to our governor, Maura Healey, who's one of the best governors in the world.
I agree. So there's a problem in our academic systems where the big companies have all the hardware because they have all the money, and the universities do not have the money for even reasonable sized data centers. I was with one university where after lots of meetings, they agreed to spend $50 million on a data center, which generates less than 1,000 GPUs, right? For the entire campus and all of research.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even include the terabytes of storage and so forth. So I and others are working on this as a philanthropic matter. The government is going to have to come in with more money for universities for this kind of stuff. That is among the best investment. When I was young, I was on a National Science Foundation scholarship and by the way, I made $15,000 a year. The return to the nation of that $15,000 has been very good, shall we say, based on the taxes that I pay and the jobs that we have created.
So core question. So glad you said that.
So creating an ecosystem for the next generation to have the access to the systems is important. It's not obvious to me that they need billions of dollars. It's pretty obvious to me that they need $1 million, $2 million.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
I want to take us in a direction of wrapping up on superintelligence and the book. We didn't finish the timeline on superintelligence, and I think it's important to give people a sense of how quickly the self-referential learning can get and how rapidly we can get to something, 1,000 times, 1 million, 1 billion times more capable than a human. On the flip side of that, Eric, when I look at my greatest concerns, when we get through this 5 to 7 year period of, let's just say, rogue actors and stabilization and such, one of the biggest concerns I have is the diminishment of human purpose. You wrote in the book, and I've listened to it, haven't read it physically, and my kids say, you don't read anymore,
Low
Dad.
attention span.
You listen to books, you don't read. But you said the real risk is not Terminator, it's drift. You argue that AI won't destroy humanity violently, but might slowly erode human values, autonomy, and judgment if left unregulated, misunderstood. So it's really a Wall-E-like future versus a Star Trek boldly go out there.
We're very, in the book, and my own personal view, is it's very important that human agency be protected.
Yeah.
Human agency means the ability to get up in the day and do what you want, subject to the law, right? And it's perfectly possible that these digital devices can create a form of a virtual prison where you don't feel that you as a human can do what you want, right? That is to be avoided.
I'm not worried about that case. I'm more worried about the case that if you want to do something, it's just so much easier to ask your robot or your AI to do it for you. The human spirit that wants to overcome a challenge. I mean, the unchallenged life is so critical.
But there will be always new challenges. When I was a boy, one of the things that I did is I would repair my father's car. Right? I don't do that anymore. When I was a boy, I used to mow the lawn. I don't do that anymore.
Sure.
Right? So there are plenty of examples of things that we used to do that we don't need to do anymore, but there'll be plenty of things. Just remember the complexity of the world that I'm describing is not a simple world. Just managing the world around you is going to be a full-time and purposeful job, partly because there will be so many people fighting for misinformation and for your attention, and there's obviously lots of competition and so forth. There's lots of things to worry about. Plus you have all of the people, trying to get your money, create opportunities, deceive you, what have you. So I think human purpose will remain because humans need purpose.
Yeah, that's the point.
And there's lots of literature that the people who have what we would consider to be low-paying, worthless jobs enjoy going to work. So The challenge is not to get rid of their job, it's to make their job more productive using AI tools. They're still going to go to work. To be very clear, this notion that we're all going to be sitting around doing poetry is not happening, right? In the future, there'll be lawyers. They'll use tools to have even more complex lawsuits against each other, right? There will be evil people who will use these tools to create even more evil problems. There will be good people who will be trying to deter the evil people. The tools change, but the structure of humanity, the way we work together, is not going to change.
Peter and I were on Mike Saylor's yacht a couple of months ago, and I was complaining that the curriculum is completely broken in all these schools. But what I meant was we should be teaching AI. And he said, yeah, they should be teaching aesthetics. And I looked at him like, what the hell are you talking about? He said, no, in the age of AI, which is imminent, look at everything around you. Whether it's good or bad, enjoyable, not enjoyable, it's all about designing aesthetics. When the AI is such a force multiplier that you can create virtually anything, what are you creating and why?
Well,
and that becomes the challenge.
If you look at Wittgenstein and the sort of the theories of all of this stuff, it is all fundamental. We're having a conversation that America has about tasks and outcomes. It's our culture. But there are other aspects of human life, meaning, thinking, reasoning. We're not going to stop doing that. Mm-hmm. So imagine if your purpose in life in the future is to figure out what's going on, and to be successful, just figuring that out is sufficient, because once you figured it out, it's taken care of for you.
That's beautiful.
Right? That provides purpose.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear that robots will take over an awful lot of mechanical or manual work. Mm-hmm. And for people who like to, I like to repair the car. I don't do it anymore. I miss it, but I have other things to do with my
Purposeful.
time.
Yeah.
Take me forward. When do you see what you define as digital superintelligence?
Within 10 years.
Within 10 years. And what do people need to know about that? What do people need to understand and sort of prepare themselves for, either from as a parent or as an employee or as a CEO?
One way to think about it is that when digital superintelligence finally arrives and is generally available and generally safe, you're going to have your own polymath. So you're going to have the sum of Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci in the equivalent of your pocket. I think thinking about how you would use that gift is interesting. And of course, evil people will become more evil, but the vast majority of people are good.
Yes.
They're well-meaning, right? So going back to your abundance argument, there are people who've studied the notion of productivity increases, and they believe that you can get, we'll see, to 30% year-over-year economic growth through abundance and so forth. That's a very wealthy world. That's a world of much less disease, many more choices, much more fun, if you will, right? Just taking all those poor people and lifting them out of the daily struggle they have. That is a great human goal.
Let's
the goal. Focus on that.
That's the goal we should have. Does GDP still have meaning in that world?
If you include services, it does. One of the things about manufacturing, and everyone's focused on trade deficits and they don't understand, the vast majority of modern economies are service economies, not manufacturing economies. And if you look at the percentage of farming, it was roughly 98% to roughly 2 or 3% in America over 100 years. If you look at manufacturing, the heydays in the 30s and 40s and 50s, those percentages are now down lower than 10%. It's not because we don't buy stuff, it's because the stuff is automated, you need fewer people. There's plenty of people working in other jobs. So again, look at the totality of the society. Is it healthy? If you look in China, it's easy to complain about them. They have now deflation. They have a term where people it's called laying down, where they stay at home. They don't participate in the workforce, which is counter to their traditional culture. If you look at reproduction rates, these countries that are essentially having no children, that's not a good thing, right? Those are problems that we're going to face. Those are the new problems of the age.
I love that. Eric, so grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you both. I love your show.
Yeah. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
If you could have had a 10-year head start on the dot-com boom back.
Bueno, tremenda charla. Me ha gustado más al principio que al final. Pero vamos a ver lo que estáis diciendo aquí por el chat. Y ya vamos a hacer unas últimas reflexiones y nos vamos. Javier Ernesto Luján Prieto. Si nos vamos del planeta sin una idea firme de civilización humana, con el tiempo podrían formarse nuevos grupos con ideologías distintas y eventualmente una guerra como los libros de Asimov. Bueno, puede pasar de todo. Y evidentemente, si nos vamos a otros planetas, pues habrá un proyecto civilizatorio. Luego, independientemente del proyecto civilizatorio, pues se podrán crear otras ideologías y volvemos al mismo, la balanza entre el bien, el mal, lo correcto e incorrecto, pues seguirá sucediendo y ocurriendo en la historia de la humanidad y a lo largo del universo. Tampoco queráis ver más allá con lo que tenemos delante. Refugio áureo, pero sí, es interesante. De ahí la serie Fundación de Isaac Asimov. Refugio áureo, creo que el problema más serio con diferencia al que nos enfrentamos es que el precio de las cosas va a tender a cero. Si el trabajo con la IA va a ser gratis, si la energía con la fusión y las renovables va a ser gratis, si extraer minerales o cultivar comida va a ser casi gratis, ¿cuánto valen las cosas? ¿Crees que la sociedad actual sobrevivirá a una sociedad en la que las cosas no tengan precio? No, entiendo que habrá una fase de caos, de auténtica locura y luego un nuevo orden. Evidentemente la sociedad que estamos viendo no está preparada para nada más que para la renta básica universal, la paguita y poca cosa más. De nuestro país, que decir, una sociedad que no retiene su talento ni lo protege y ni controla tampoco el tipo de civilización o proyecto civilizatorio que quiere crear, que no sabe proteger su cultura. Su gente, pues ¿qué esperáis de un país como España, pero más allá de Europa? Y ved lo que está ocurriendo con Estados Unidos, qué dicen, y nos posicionamos en que, bueno, poco vamos a participar de toda esa revolución, que es una pena. No digo que no estemos a tiempo, pero ¿qué tendría que pasar? ¿Una guerra? ¿Una revolución intelectual? ¿Un cambio de estatus de Europa, de España? No lo sé. No lo sé. Al final solo uno puede intentar cambiar su realidad o visionar cómo cambiar todo, pero es complicado más que ir dando pasos, ir mejorando, ir participando de esta nueva era, entender hacia dónde vamos, hacia dónde nos quieren llevar, hacia dónde queremos ir y bueno, intentar trabajar unidos y ver qué se puede hacer, ser inteligentes, ¿no? Creo que en unas decenas de años, dice Refugio Áureo, serán necesarios nuevos sistemas políticos. No, solo hará falta una superinteligencia. Eso será el programa del lunes, martes. Que sepan manejar esto. No será necesaria una renta universal porque las cosas no tendrán que ser pagadas. No, pero habrá algún tipo de puntuación, puntos intercambiables por... seguro que hay algún tipo de gamificación que nos permita casi tener una equivalencia a lo que sería el dinero. Da miedo ese futuro, nos acercamos a una nueva tiranía de quien posea de forma arbitraria los medios de producción. Bueno, pero esto ha ocurrido siempre, pero ahora más. A un tecnofeudalismo, ¿no? Donde Europa y España pues serán los medievos mamporreros, pero bueno, ya los vemos en acción. Disfrutan muchísimo siéndolo. Alejandro Ruiz y defendiendo la regulación, la EA Act, haciendo entrevistas a toda esta gente que lo ha creado. Alejandro Ruiz, ya se menciona en artículos de prensa que Sánchez y Zapatero han convertido a España en el caballo de Troya para la entrada de China en Europa. Veremos si prospera la metástasis. De dos de los personajes, Pedro Sánchez y Zapatero, más negativos para la historia de nuestro gran país. No sé cuál es peor. Refugio Áureo, este proceso ya ha empezado, pensamos que dejamos de fabricar por China, pero si miran los datos, China tampoco fabrica tanto. No, a ver, ¿cómo que China no fabrica tanto? Lo fabrica todo. Alejandro Ruiz, esa evolución del trabajo futuro poco probable solo podría ocurrir en países promotores. Bueno, es por donde va a empezar, China y Estados Unidos, obviamente. Y más avanzados en inteligencia artificial, habrá más países subdesarrollados. Sí, habrán grandes desigualdades. y bueno, Alberto Ceni, que lo vamos a contratar como para poner las frases célebres. Alberto Zenit, hacia el homo inutilus totalis. Bueno, me lo pregunta. No, yo sabéis que defiendo que vamos hacia el humano X. Es algo nuevo que en la charla de inversión racional va a verse reflejada una parte, quizá a lo mejor no la más positiva, no lo sé. Y bueno, tengo que sacar tiempo para escribir. creo que desde mi humildad es necesario una visión optimista, incluso humanista. La charla me ha gustado mucho, el programa también me lo he pasado bien. La segunda parte más aburrida que la primera. Pero bueno, Eric Schmidt aporta cosas, razonamientos, saca mucho la patita, tiene su historia, su importancia, y no lo habíamos traído al canal. Metido muy en el tema militar, bueno, un auténtico personaje, que ha estado bastante en la sombra, pero en la era de la inteligencia artificial se ve que el ego no lo ha podido dejar estar detrás y ha pasado a primera línea y está saliendo en un montón de contenidos, programas, entrevistas, se ha metido en un montón de negocios, filantropía, bueno, es un millonario ocioso en un momento apasionante para vivir y disfrutar. Yo estoy desde apasionado con un cierto vértigo, pero emocionado porque quizás sería interesante, pero bueno, más adelante contar algunas cosas que he vivido a lo largo de mi vida, que cuando vivo todo esto que estoy viviendo, pues yo creo que es el momento, ¿no? Es el momento de dar sentido a todo. Y lo voy a dejar ahí, el propósito, como ha hablado Eric Schmidt, ¿no? El propósito, qué importante es ese propósito trascendente, ese propósito no racional. Nos van a desconectar de nuestra esencia, de nuestra conexión, y vamos a ser programas y automatismos, como la misma sociedad, ¿no? Una sociedad fría y sin alma. Y está en la responsabilidad de todos que seamos justamente lo contrario. Que seamos verdad, amor, empatía, que seamos en definitiva alma y que sepamos ser humanos y estar orgullosos de ello, porque, como repetiré bastante en esa entrevista en Inversión Racional Ronda 2, After Jiddu Krishnamurti, somos la historia de la humanidad y espero cuando esté en el otro lado leer el libro y emocionarme con él. Gracias por estar ahí, amigos, gracias por acompañarme, por acompañarnos. Hemos tenido un programa con una gran audiencia en directo, así que muchas gracias. Empezamos mañana una semana épica. Esta semana no hemos faltado ni un día, teniendo un programa o dos por día. Así que no los oigo, pero espero que deis muchos aplausos a la labor que estamos haciendo porque nos lo estamos currando. Un abrazo, amigos. Nos vemos mañana.